The sound of his hand connecting with my cheek echoed like a gunshot through the crystal ballroom. It was loud enough to silence the jazz band in the corner, and sharp enough to make 70 of Atlanta's most elite tech executives freeze in mid-conversation. My cheek burned, throbbing with a heat that spread rapidly to my ear, but the pain was secondary to the absolute shock that paralyzed the room. My husband Terrence stood over me, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. He straightened his tuxedo jacket, looked around the room with a sneer, and thought he had just asserted his dominance. He thought he had just taught his wife a lesson in respect. He had absolutely no idea that the hand he used to strike me was the same hand that had just signed his professional death warrant. My name is Tiana, and while Terrence thinks I am just a freelance copywriter who brings in grocery money, he does not know that I am the majority shareholder of the very company he works for. He does not know that the entity listed as Gemini Holdings on the board of directors roster is actually me. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of his career, but because of what he just did, it is going to be the beginning of his end. Before I tell you how this gala turned into a crime scene and how I destroyed his life without lifting a finger, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through the pain while holding a secret that could burn everything down. The evening began 3 hours earlier, and the air inside the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and desperation. This was the annual Winter Gala for Apex Solutions, the tech firm where Terrence served as the chief marketing officer. He had spent the last month talking about nothing else. To him, this night was his coronation. The current CEO was hinting at retirement, and Terrence was convinced he was next in line for the throne. I walked beside him, my arm linked through his, playing the role of the supportive trophy wife. I was wearing a vintage black silk gown that draped over my frame perfectly. It was an archival piece from the 90s, worth more than Terrence's car, but to the untrained eye, it just looked old. And of course, the first person to point that out was Jessica. Jessica was my sister-in-law, married to Terrence's younger brother, Kevin. She was a petite blonde woman with a smile that never quite reached her cold blue eyes. She was standing near the open bar, holding a glass of champagne like it was a weapon. Kevin was next to her, looking bored and slightly disheveled in a rented tuxedo. As we approached, Jessica's eyes scanned me from head to toe, lingering on the hem of my dress with clear disdain. "Oh, Tiana, you are so brave," Jessica said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, loud enough for the circle of wives nearby to hear. "I would never have the confidence to wear something from a thrift store to an event like this. But good for you for being budget conscious. I know things are tight for you guys since your little writing gigs are not exactly steady." I felt Terrence's arm tense under mine, but instead of defending me, instead of telling his sister-in-law that his wife was wearing a $5,000 vintage designer gown, he pulled his arm away slightly, creating distance between us. He leaned down, his breath smelling of scotch and mint, and whispered harshly into my ear, "Do not say anything stupid, Tiana. Just smile and nod. I cannot have you embarrassing me with your ghetto attitude tonight. Jessica is just trying to help you look presentable. Maybe you should ask her for fashion advice next time, instead of dressing like a librarian." I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a smile. A ghetto attitude. That is what he called it whenever I tried to defend myself. I looked at Jessica, who was smirking into her glass, waiting for me to snap so she could play the victim. I looked at Kevin, who was busy eyeing the waitress's tray of hors d'oeuvres, completely living off his brother's handouts. They all thought I was the charity case. They thought I was lucky that Terrence had picked me up and given me a life. What none of them knew was that earlier that very morning, while Terrence was screaming at me for not ironing his shirt correctly, I had closed a private equity deal worth $2 million. My phone, currently sitting in my clutch, contained notifications from my bank confirming the wire transfer. I was not just rich, I was wealthy. My grandmother had left me a small fortune that I had quietly, aggressively grown into an empire over the last 5 years. I owned the apartment complex Jessica and Kevin lived in, though they paid rent to a management company and had no idea. I owned the debt on Terrence's student loans, which I had purchased through a third-party debt collector just to keep an eye on his finances. I was the safety net they were all walking on, and they were treating me like the dirt beneath it. I decided to stay silent, not because I was weak, but because I was calculating. I took a sip of sparkling water and watched Terrence work the room. He was charming, I had to give him that. He had a smile that could sell ice to a polar bear, and tonight he was selling himself to the board members. He laughed too loud at their jokes, touched their shoulders too familiarly, and kept glancing around to make sure people were watching him be important. The trouble started when we made our way to the VIP circle. Standing there was Mr. Henderson, the current CEO of Apex Solutions. Mr. Henderson was a man of few words, a serious gray-haired veteran of the industry who valued competence over charisma. He was the one man Terrence was terrified of, and the one man Terrence needed to impress. Terrence puffed out his chest as we approached. "Good evening, Mr. Henderson." Terrence boomed, extending his hand. "The gala is a triumph absolutely magnificent. It really reflects the growth we have achieved this quarter under my marketing direction." Mr. Henderson shook his hand briefly, his eyes tired. "Glad you are enjoying it, Terrence. We were just discussing the fiscal projections for the upcoming product launch. The board is concerned about the customer acquisition cost. It seems a bit high in the proposal you submitted." This was a test. I knew it. Mr. Henderson knew it. But Terrence, blinded by his own ego, saw it as a stage. He swirled his drink and let out a confident chuckle that sounded completely out of place. "High, not at all, sir," Terrence said, his voice projecting so that nearby employees could hear. "You have to spend money to make money. We are projecting a 300% return on ad spend within the first month. The market is hungry for what we have. I have got the data right here in my head. We are looking at a user base expansion of 50,000 units by Q1. I froze. 50,000 units. The report I had reviewed in my private home office, the report sent to the board of directors, which included me, clearly stated a maximum optimistic projection of 20,000 units. Terrence was lying. Or worse, he had not read the report his own team had written. He was pulling numbers out of thin air to sound impressive. Mr. Henderson raised an eyebrow. 50,000. That is significantly higher than the written brief. Terrence, are you sure about those figures? Because if we budget for 50,000 and only hit 20, we're in the red. Terrence waved his hand dismissively. The brief was conservative, sir. I am giving you the real leadership numbers. Trust me, I know this market better than anyone. My wife here can tell you I practically sleep at the office. He gestured to me, using me as a prop to validate his lie. The circle of executives looked at me. I saw the doubt in Mr. Henderson's eyes. He knew Terrence was fluffing the numbers. If Terrence kept going, he was going to talk himself into a corner he could not get out of. He was about to promise results he could not deliver, which would lead to an audit, which would expose his incompetence. I tried to save him. I tried to de-escalate the situation with a bit of self-deprecating humor, the kind of social grease wives are taught to use to smooth over their husbands' rough edges. I smiled warmly at Mr. Henderson and lightly touched Terrence's arm. "Oh, you know Terrence," I said, keeping my voice light and teasing. "He is always an optimist. When he says 50,000 units by Q1, he means it in the same way he promises to do the dishes by bedtime. It might happen eventually, but we might need to adjust the timeline a little bit for reality." It was a soft joke, a gentle pivot. The group laughed. Mr. Henderson actually chuckled, his shoulders relaxing. It was a lifeline. I had signaled to the CEO that we knew the numbers were an exaggeration, framing it as passion rather than deceit, saving Terrence from committing to a lie on public record. But Terrence did not see a lifeline. He saw an attack. The laughter of his coworkers triggered something dark inside him. The narcissist in him could not handle being the butt of a joke, even one that saved his skin. His smile vanished instantly. His eyes went dead. He turned to me slowly, his body rigid. The laughter in the circle died down awkwardly as they noticed his reaction. "You think that is funny?" Terrence asked, his voice low and dangerous. I kept my smile fixed, trying to signal him with my eyes to drop it. "Honey, I was just teasing." "You are making me look like a liar in front of my boss," he hissed, stepping closer to me. "You are disrespecting me." "Terrence, please," I whispered, seeing the onlookers beginning to stare. "You are making a scene." "I am the one making a scene." he shouted suddenly, causing heads to turn from across the room. "You are the one running your mouth about things you do not understand. You are just a housewife, Tiana. You do not know anything about business. You do not know anything about numbers. So why do not you shut your mouth before you embarrass yourself further?" The room went silent, dead silent. Mr. Henderson took a step forward, looking alarmed. "Terrence, that is enough," he warned. But Terrence was too far gone. The humiliation of being laughed at had short-circuited his logic. He felt small, so he needed to make me smaller. He looked at me with pure hatred, seeing not his partner but an enemy who had dared to bruise his ego. I looked him in the eye, my own expression hardening. I did not cower. I stood tall. And I said calmly and clearly, "I know enough about business to know that lying about projections to your CEO is a fireable offense, Terrence." That was the trigger. His hand moved before I could flinch, a wide swinging arc that carried all his frustration, all his insecurity, and all his rage. Crack! The impact snapped my head to the side. The force was enough to make me stumble in my heels. I caught myself on a high-top table, knocking over a flute of champagne that shattered on the marble floor. The sound of the glass breaking was the only thing that followed the slap. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I could feel the heat radiating from my skin where his palm had connected. I tasted a metallic tang of blood on my inner lip. Slowly, I lifted my hand to my face, touching the stinging flesh. I turned my head back to look at him. Terrence was breathing hard, his hands still suspended in the air. For a split second, I saw regret in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a defensive, stubborn glare. He looked around the room, realizing everyone was staring at him with horror. Mr. Henderson looked like he was about to be sick. Jessica's mouth was hanging open, her champagne glass forgotten. "Know your place," Terrence spat out, his voice shaking slightly as he tried to regain control of the narrative. "Do not ever speak to me like that in public again, Mr. Henderson stepped in, then his voice cold as ice. "Terrence, get out." Terrence blinked as if waking up from a trance. "Excuse me, sir, I said get out." Mr. Henderson repeated, his face red with suppressed fury. "Take your wife and leave this building immediately. We will discuss your future at this company on Monday, if you even have one." Terrence looked at the CEO, then at me. He let out a scoff, a nervous, arrogant sound. "Fine. Come on, Tiana, we are leaving. This party is boring anyway." He grabbed my wrist, his grip bruising. I could have pulled away. I could have screamed. I could have told Mr. Henderson right then and there to call security. But I did not. I let him drag me out of the ballroom. I walked with my head high, ignoring the whispers that erupted like wildfire behind us. I did not cry. I did not beg. Because in my mind I was already calculating. I was already moving assets. I was already drafting the agenda for the emergency board meeting. The valet brought our car around Terrence's leased BMW that he was 2 months behind on payments for. He shoved me into the passenger seat and slammed the door so hard the window rattled. He stormed around to the driver's side, got in, and peeled out of the hotel driveway, screeching tires in a display of impotent rage. The ride home was a masterclass in gaslighting. "I cannot believe you did that," he shouted, hitting the steering wheel. "You ruined everything." I was closing him, Tiana. I had him eating out of the palm of my hand, and then you had to open your big mouth. I stared out the window at the passing city lights, my hand still cradling my cheek. "You hit me, Terrence. You slapped me in front of your boss. Because you provoked me," he screamed, glancing at me with wild eyes. "You backed me into a corner. You know how much pressure I am under. You know I need this promotion to pay for your lifestyle, for the house, for everything. And you sabotage me. What kind of wife does that?" I stayed silent. There was no point in arguing with a delusional man. He was rewriting history in real time, making himself the victim of my clumsiness. "And do not think you are getting away with this," he continued, his voice dropping to a sinister growl. "You clearly do not appreciate what I do for you. You have gotten too comfortable, too spoiled." We pulled into the driveway of our suburban rental home. Before I could even unbuckle my seatbelt, he turned to me and held out his hand. "Give it to me," he demanded. What I asked, my voice, calm, almost robotic. "The credit card, the Amex I gave you, and the keys to the spare car. You are obviously not responsible enough to handle them. If you want to act like a child, I will treat you like one. From now on, you are on a strict allowance. No more shopping, no more luncheons. You stay home and you learn how to be a supportive wife." I looked at his hand. He wanted the platinum card he had added me to as an authorized user, a card that had a $5,000 limit. He thought this was power. He thought cutting off my access to his meager funds would crush me. I reached into my purse, pulled out the card, and dropped it into his palm. Then I put the keys to the Honda Civic in his hand, too. "Is that all I asked?" He looked surprised that I did not fight back. He sneered, closing his fist around the plastic and metal. "Get inside. And sleep in the guest room. I do not want to look at you tonight." I got out of the car without a word. I walked up the driveway, unlocked the front door, and headed straight for the guest bedroom on the first floor. I heard him stomping upstairs to the master suite, slamming the door loud enough to shake the frame. I heard the lock click. He thought he had won. He thought he had stripped me of my resources and banished me to the corner. I sat down on the edge of the guest bed. The room was cold. I took a deep breath, exhaling the fear and the shock. My cheek was still throbbing, but my mind was crystal clear. I reached into the hidden pocket of my dress, a small compartment sewn into the lining that Terrence knew nothing about. I pulled out a sleek black burner phone. It was not the phone Terrence paid the bill for. This was my business line, the line that only 3 people in the world had access to. I dialed the number for Davis and Associates. It rang once. Ms. Carter. The voice on the other end was sharp, awake, and professional. It was 11 at night, but my lawyer, Jameson Davis, always answered. "Jameson." I said, my voice steady, shedding the persona of the submissive wife like a snake shedding dead skin. "I need you to execute Clause 7 of the Gemini Holdings operational agreement." There was a pause on the line, the sound of typing. "Clause 7, Jameson repeated. "That is the emergency intervention clause, Ms. Carter. That requires a vote of no confidence in the current executive leadership due to gross misconduct. Are we moving against the CEO?" "No," I said, staring at the ceiling where I could hear Terrence pacing the floor above me. "We are moving against the CMO. I want his assets frozen, pending an internal audit. I want his company email archived immediately. And Jameson." "Yes, ma'am. Contact the other board members. Tell them to clear their schedules for Monday morning. The chairman is coming in." I hung up the phone and lay back on the pillow. Upstairs, my husband was probably sleeping soundly, dreaming of his promotion. He had taken my credit card. He had taken my keys. But he had forgotten one thing. He didn't own the house we were sleeping in. I did. And Monday morning, he was going to find out that he didn't own anything at all. The morning sun sliced through the blinds of the living room, hitting my face like a spotlight. I sat on the beige sofa, pressing a bag of frozen peas against my left cheek. The throbbing had settled into a dull, rhythmic ache, but the bruise was already blooming, a dark purple map of my husband's rage spreading across my skin. I had not slept. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling of the guest room, listening to the silence of the house I paid for, formulating the next steps of a plan that would leave this family with nothing but their pride. I was just about to call my lawyer back to confirm the freezing of the assets when the front door unlocked. I froze. I had not given anyone a key. But then I remembered. Terrence had given a spare key to his mother Lorraine 6 months ago for emergencies. Apparently in their twisted world, me getting slapped in public constituted an emergency for them. Not for my safety, but for their reputation. The door swung open and they marched in like a battalion of soldiers entering conquered territory. Lorraine led the pack wearing a faux fur coat that she thought made her look like old money, but actually made her look like a desperate lottery winner. Behind her were Kevin and Jessica. Kevin, my brother-in-law, looked hungover wearing sweatpants and a hoodie that cost more than his monthly contribution to society, which was $0. And Jessica. She walked in with her nose wrinkled, as if the air in my home, a home kept spotless by me, was beneath her standards. They did not knock. They did not ask if they could come in. They simply invaded. Lorraine stopped in the middle of the living room, dropping her oversized handbag onto the coffee table, right on top of my coasters. She looked at me. She looked at the bag of frozen peas. She looked at the bruise, and then she rolled her eyes. "Look at you," Lorraine said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "Sitting there feeling sorry for yourself. I hope you know that Terrence is upstairs in a terrible state. He is absolutely distraught." I slowly lowered the bag of peas, revealing the full extent of the injury. Distraught, I asked, my voice calm but raspy. He is distraught because he physically assaulted his wife in front of 70 witnesses, or because he is afraid of the consequences. Lorraine waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Tiana. Assault is such an ugly word. It was a mistake. A heat-of-the-moment reaction. You provoked him. I have known my son for 35 years, and he has never raised a hand to anyone. You must have pushed him to his absolute limit. I stared at her. This was the woman whose mortgage I had anonymously paid off last year when the bank was threatening foreclosure. She thought it was a clerical error or a blessing from God. It was neither. It was me ensuring my husband's mother did not end up on my couch. And here she was, justifying the violence against me. Kevin wandered into the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator door open. He did not even say hello. He was just looking for food. Yo, Tiana, do we have any of that expensive organic orange juice left? Kevin shouted from the kitchen, his voice muffled by chewing. I am starving. Terrence said you guys were stocked up. I closed my eyes for a second, fighting the urge to scream. The audacity was suffocating. They treated my home like a convenience store, and me like the clerk who had shortchanged them. Jessica walked over to the armchair opposite me and sat down, crossing her legs. She was wearing a tennis outfit, though I knew for a fact she did not play tennis. It was all about the aesthetic. She looked at my bruise with a clinical detachment, a small nasty smirk playing on her lips. You really did a number on him last night, Jessica said, shaking her head. I mean, honestly, Tiana, wearing that rag of a dress was bad enough, but humiliating him in front of Mr. Henderson. You know Kevin and I are depending on Terrence getting this promotion. If he loses his job because you could not keep your mouth shut, you are taking food out of our mouths. I looked at her. Taking food out of their mouths, Kevin was currently in my kitchen eating my yogurt. I did not realize my husband's career was the only thing keeping you fed. Jessica, I said, my tone icy. Maybe if Kevin got a job, you would not have to worry so much about Terrence's employment status. The room went silent. Kevin poked his head out of the kitchen, a spoon in his mouth. Hey, uncalled for, he mumbled. I am an entrepreneur. I am in between ventures. Jessica's face turned a blotchy shade of red. She leaned forward, her blue eyes narrowing into slits. She dropped the facade of the concerned sister-in-law. The venom came out. Excuse me, she hissed. Who do you think you are talking to? You are just a guest in this family, Tiana, a lucky guest. You should be grateful. Terrence even looked your way. She stood up, needing to physically look down on me to feel superior. She smoothed her white skirt, a gesture of pure arrogance. Let's be honest, she continued, her voice rising in pitch. A woman like you. From your background, you are lucky to be in a house like this. You are lucky to have a man like Terrence who provides everything. Most women with your history are struggling to pay rent on a one-bedroom apartment. And here you are, living in the suburbs, driving a decent car, pretending to be one of us. She took a step closer, invading my personal space. The smell of her cloying floral perfume made me nauseous. But you are not one of us, Tiana, and last night proved it. You have this ghetto attitude that you just cannot seem to shake off. You get a little comfortable and the real you comes out. That sass, that disrespect. It is low class, and honestly, it is embarrassing for all of us. Terrence is a director. He needs a wife who acts like a lady, not some loudmouth from the hood who does not know when to shut up. The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Ghetto attitude, low class. From my background, it was a masterclass in coded racism. She was not just attacking my behavior. She was attacking my identity, my race, and my worth. She was reducing me to a stereotype to make herself feel better about her own mediocrity. Lorraine nodded in agreement, picking at a non-existent piece of lint on her coat. She is right, Tiana, harsh but right. Terrence needs a partner who fits his trajectory. We have been very patient with you, trying to mold you, trying to help you elevate yourself, but you have to meet us halfway. You have to learn your place. I looked from Jessica's sneering face to Lorraine's haughty expression. I looked at Kevin, who had returned to the living room eating an apple, my apple, and nodding along as if his wife had just delivered a sermon. They thought they held all the cards. They thought Terrence was the sun and I was just a moon reflecting his light. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was broke. They had absolutely no idea that the rag I wore last night was vintage Versace. They had no idea that my background included a grandmother who was a silent partner in 3 real estate development firms. They had no idea that the very chair Jessica was sitting on was paid for by a dividend check from a tech startup I seeded 4 years ago. I stood up. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw the bag of peas at Jessica's head, even though the urge was overwhelming. I channeled the energy of every boardroom negotiation I had ever won. I let the silence stretch out, making them uncomfortable. I looked Jessica dead in the eye. Her smirk faltered slightly under my gaze. "Thank you for that perspective, Jessica," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "It is always illuminating to hear what you really think. And Lorraine, thank you for clarifying where you stand on domestic abuse." I walked over to the front door and held it open. "Now get out of my house." Lorraine gasped. "Excuse me." "This is my son's house." I stared at her. A cold, hard stare that finally made her flinch. "Get out." I did not tell them that the deed to the house was in the name of a limited liability company that I owned 100%. I did not tell them that Terrence's name was nowhere on the title. I saved that ammunition. I wanted them to leave thinking I was just being emotional. I wanted them to leave thinking they had won the argument, that they had successfully put me in my place. Because when the hammer finally dropped, I wanted the shock to be absolute. Jessica let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Come on, Lorraine, let's go check on Terrence upstairs. We do not need to listen to this ungrateful, hysterical woman." They turned their backs on me and headed toward the stairs, completely ignoring my command. They walked right past me up the carpeted steps to the master bedroom, claiming the space as their own. I watched them go. I closed the front door quietly. I did not chase them. I did not call the police to have them removed. Not yet. Instead, I walked back to the sofa, picked up my phone, and unlocked the secure folder that held my banking apps. I opened the interface for the family trust, the one that I used to discreetly funnel money into Terrence's account to cover the bills he could not afford. I tapped the screen. Monthly transfer canceled. Status immediate. Then I opened the app for the car leasing company. Vehicle 2023 BMW X5. Primary payer Gemini Holdings. Action report, stolen, repossess. I smiled, the pain in my cheek forgotten. Jessica thought I had a ghetto attitude. She was about to see what happened when the low-class wife decided to close the bank. They wanted me to know my place. I was about to show them theirs. And it wasn't in this house. It was on the street. The sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs signaled the second wave of the attack. Terrence was coming down. He had spent 20 minutes upstairs with his mother and sister-in-law, likely being coddled and told that he was the victim, that his violent outburst was a righteous reaction to a disrespectful wife. When he finally appeared in the living room archway, he had changed out of his tuxedo into a designer tracksuit that I had bought him for his birthday. He looked refreshed, emboldened by the echo chamber of his family, his chest puffed out with renewed arrogance. Jessica followed close behind him, looking like the cat that had just swallowed the canary, while Kevin lingered in the background, still chewing on something he had scavenged from my pantry. Terrence did not sit down. He stood over me, utilizing his height to intimidate, casting a shadow over the sofa where I still sat. He crossed his arms, looking down at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. "We have been talking," Terrence announced, his voice booming in the quiet house, "and we have decided that there need to be consequences for what happened last night. You clearly do not understand the value of a dollar Tiana. You do not understand the pressure I am under to provide for this family. You think money just grows on trees, that you can jeopardize my career and still live in luxury." I almost laughed. Luxury. We lived in a rental house in a mid-tier suburb. The furniture was from IKEA, upgraded only because I had secretly replaced the cushions with high-end foam. But I kept my face blank, waiting for the decree. So Terrence continued pacing back and forth on the rug I had purchased. "Effective immediately, your monthly allowance is terminated. No more $500 for groceries and incidentals. If you need something, you will ask me. You will present a receipt, and I will decide if it is a necessary expense. You need to learn what it feels like to actually depend on someone. Maybe then you will appreciate me. $500. He called that an allowance. In my private investment portfolio, $500 was what I made in interest every hour. But to him, it was a leash. He was trying to strangle me financially, unaware that I was the one supplying the oxygen to his entire lifestyle. I nodded slowly, looking down at my hands. Okay, Terrence, if that is what you think is fair, I think it is more than fair, Jessica chimed in, leaning against the doorframe. Honestly, Tiana, most wives contribute something. You just take. It is time you felt the pinch. Terrence stopped pacing and looked at me, a cruel glint in his eyes. And one more thing. Jessica needs to go to the mall. She needs to pick up a few things for the brunch tomorrow, since you are obviously not capable of hosting properly. Give her the keys to the Civic. I looked up. The Honda Civic. My daily driver. It was a 2015 model with a dent in the rear bumper and an air conditioner that rattled like a dying lawnmower. It was the car I drove to maintain the illusion of being the struggling wife. Terrence drove the leased BMW X5, and I drove the beater. You want me to give her my car? I asked, feigning concern. But how will I get to the grocery store? How will I run errands? Terrence scoffed. You can walk. The store is only a mile away. It will do you good. Maybe you can walk off some of that attitude. Besides, Jessica's car is in the shop, and she deserves to drive something reliable. Hand them over. Jessica smirked, extending her hand with an expectant wiggle of her fingers. Come on, Tiana. Don't be selfish. It is just a car. I reached into my purse. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of the key fob. For a second I hesitated, but not because I wanted to keep the car. I hesitated because I was holding back a laugh. They were fighting over a scrap metal Honda, while I had a delivery confirmation on my phone for a matte black Mercedes G-Wagon fully customized with a red leather interior, currently sitting in a private climate-controlled garage 5 miles away. I had been waiting for the right moment to unveil it, perhaps after I left Terrence, as a final symbol of my liberation. I pulled out the Honda keys and dropped them into Jessica's hand. Be careful with second gear, I said softly. It sticks sometimes. Jessica snatched the keys, closing her fist around them like she had just won a trophy. I think I can handle a basic car, Tiana. I am not incompetent. She turned to leave, but then she stopped. Her eyes fell on my purse, which was sitting open on the coffee table. It was a simple leather tote, nothing flashy, but inside, tucked into the side pocket, was the emergency cash I kept for household repairs. $200 in 20s. Wait a second, Jessica said, her eyes narrowing. Terrence, look! She pointed a manicured finger at the cash, peeking out. Terrence followed her gaze. He stepped forward and grabbed the purse before I could react. He upended it onto the coffee table. Lip balm, receipts, a pen, and the small stack of bills tumbled out. I thought you said you were broke, Terrence said accusingly. He snatched up the cash, counting it quickly. $200. Where did you get this, Tiana? Have you been skimming from the grocery money? Have you been stealing from me? I stared at him, my heart pounding with a cold, hard rage. That was money I had earned from a small copywriting gig I did for a neighbor. It was honest money. But to him, everything I had was stolen from his benevolence. That is my money, Terrence, I said, my voice firm. I saved it. Saved it from what I gave you, he corrected, shoving the bills into his own pocket. Which means it is mine. You do not get to have a secret stash while I am out here busting my back. Consider this a fine, a penalty for the humiliation you caused last night. He turned to Kevin. Here, Kev, go get yourself some lunch. Tiana is paying. He peeled off a 20 and tossed it at his brother. Kevin caught it with a grin, not an ounce of shame in his body. Thanks, Tiana. You are a lifesaver. They stood there, the three of them, having stripped me of my allowance, my transportation, and my last bit of cash. They looked triumphant. They thought they had left me with nothing. They thought they had clipped my wings so I could never fly away. Terrence leaned down, his face inches from mine. We are going out. Jessica needs to shop, and I need to clear my head. You stay here. Clean this house. Iron my work shirts for Monday. And think about how lucky you are that I am even keeping you around. I watched them walk out the door. I heard the engine of the Honda Civic sputter to life, a sound that usually annoyed me, but today sounded like sweet music. I heard them laughing as they backed out of the driveway. I sat alone in the silent house. I reached for my phone, which they had forgotten to confiscate in their greed. I opened my banking app. I looked at the balance. Then I opened the GPS tracker app for the Honda Civic. I watched the little dot move down the street. "Enjoy the ride, Jessica," I whispered to the empty room. "You have the keys to a car that needs a new transmission. I have the keys to the kingdom." I stood up and walked to the window, watching the car disappear around the corner. They took my $200. That was fine. It was a cheap price to pay for the evidence I now had. Financial abuse, theft, coercion. I added it all to the mental ledger. My stomach growled. I realized I hadn't eaten since the gala. I walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and saw the empty space where my yogurt used to be. Kevin had eaten the last of it. I smiled, a real, genuine, terrifying smile. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. "Hello, concierge. Yes, this is Ms. Carter. I need a car service to pick me up in 20 minutes. Destination, the Bentley dealership. No, actually, take me to the lawyer's office first. I have a withdrawal to make. And send the black SUV. I am done hiding." I went upstairs to the master bedroom, the room I was forbidden to enter. I walked into the closet and pulled out a small, locked briefcase from the back shelf hidden behind Terrence's old college sweatshirts. I spun the dial. Click. Inside lay the documents that would end them. The deed to the house, the loan notes, the majority shareholder certificate. They took my cash. I was about to take their reality. Let the games begin. The silence in the house after they left was not empty. It was heavy, vibrating with the energy of a storm that was just beginning to gather. I waited until the sound of the Honda Civic's struggling engine faded completely down the street before I moved. I did not go to the kitchen to clean up their mess. I did not go to the laundry room to iron Terrence's shirts as he had commanded. Instead, I walked down the hallway to the small, cramped room at the back of the house that Terrence referred to as my little hobby room. To him, this room was where I wasted time writing copy for pennies or scrapbooking. He rarely entered it because it was too small for his ego. To me, this room was the command center of a financial empire. I locked the door behind me. I sat down at the plain white desk, the one I had bought at a garage sale to keep up appearances. I pulled my laptop out of the bottom drawer, a high-performance machine that looked deceptively ordinary on the outside. I opened the lid, and the screen illuminated my face in the dim light. I did not log into a social media account or a recipe blog. I engaged the VPN, a virtual private network that routed my connection through 3 different countries for security. Then I logged into my primary brokerage account. The interface loaded instantly. The numbers refreshed in real time. $12,400,382.14. I stared at the number. It was a number that breathed. It was a number that represented freedom power and a legacy my grandmother had entrusted to me. She had been a maid for 40 years, but she had ears like a hawk. She listened to the wealthy men she served, and she bought land when they sold. She bought stocks when they panicked. When she died, she didn't just leave me money. She left me a map, and I had followed it religiously, turning her $3 million into $12 million in just 5 years. I touched the screen gently. Terrence had just humiliated me over $200. He had thrown a $20 bill at his brother like a king feeding a peasant, unaware that the woman he was robbing could buy the entire company he worked for and turn it into a parking lot if she wanted to. The contrast between his perceived power and my actual reality was almost laughable. But the laughter died in my throat as a notification chimed softly from the laptop speakers. It was a secure email. The subject line was simple: Case File 892 Update. My heart rate spiked. This was not about stocks. This was the report I had commissioned 2 weeks ago from a forensic accountant and private investigator named Vance. I had hired him because I noticed small inconsistencies in our household budget money disappearing that Terrence claimed was for business dinners. I suspected he was hiding debt. I suspected he was bad with money. I was not prepared for what I was about to read. I clicked open the file. It was a 40-page PDF. The first page was a summary, and as my eyes scanned the bullet points, my blood turned to ice. Subject Terrence Carter. Occupation CMO Apex Solutions. Findings grand larceny, embezzlement, wire fraud. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath catching in my chest. I scrolled down to the financial breakdown. Vance had done his job terrifyingly well. He had traced a series of shell companies that Terrence had set up over the last 18 months. Terrence was not just bad with money, he was a criminal. According to the report, Terrence had been approving false invoices for marketing consulting services. These invoices were being paid by Apex Solutions, the company where I was the majority shareholder, into a bank account controlled by Terrence. He was stealing from the company. He was stealing from me. But where was the money going? He wasn't spending it on the house. He wasn't spending it on me. We were living in a rental. I drove a beater. I scrolled to page 10, and there it was, the answer. The money totaling over $450,000 in the last year was being funneled into two distinct places. The first was a high-end luxury apartment complex in downtown Buckhead. The tenant listed on the lease was a woman named Chloe Miller. I recognized the name immediately. Chloe was the 22-year-old marketing intern Terrence had hired 6 months ago. The girl he said was bright and full of potential. The girl he had been mentoring late at night. Photos attached to the file showed Terrence and Chloe entering the building. Photos of them at dinners, I was told, were client meetings. Photos of him buying her jewelry at Tiffany's using a debit card linked to the shell company. He was not just cheating, he was funding an entire second life with a mistress using stolen corporate funds. He was playing the big shot, the wealthy benefactor, using money he had embezzled from his wife's investment. But the second drain on the funds was even worse. The report showed a series of wire transfers to an offshore sports betting platform. The account holder, Kevin Carter. I stared at the screen, my hand covering my mouth. Kevin. The brother who sat in my living room eating my food and calling me lazy. The brother who claimed to be an entrepreneur. He was a gambling addict, and he was in deep. The records showed that Kevin owed nearly $80,000 to a bookie in Las Vegas. Terrence had been using the stolen company funds to pay off Kevin's debts, keeping his brother's legs from getting broken while putting his own neck in a noose. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind. The pressure Terrence was under, the desperation for the promotion, the way he exploded last night when I made a joke about money. He wasn't just stressed about a job, he was terrified. He was hemorrhaging money to keep his mistress happy and his brother alive, and he was doing it by robbing the corporate treasury that I essentially owned. If the board found out, Terrence wouldn't just be fired, he would be prosecuted. He would go to federal prison for years. And the irony, the money he was stealing was technically my money. As the majority shareholder, those funds were my dividends. He was stealing from his wife to pay for his girlfriend and his brother. I felt a cold, calm rage settle over me. It was different from the anger I felt when he slapped me. That was personal. This was business. This was war. He thought he had stripped me of my resources today. He thought taking my cash and my car keys had rendered me helpless. He had no idea that he had just handed me the weapon that would end his life as he knew it. I did not cry. I did not throw the laptop across the room. Instead, I reached for the mouse and clicked print. The laser printer in the corner hummed to life. Page after page of damning evidence began to slide into the tray. Bank statements, photos, text messages, the lease agreement for the mistress's apartment, the betting slips. I watched the stack of paper grow. This was not just a divorce file anymore. This was an indictment. I picked up my phone and dialed Jameson, my lawyer. "Tiana," he answered, sounding surprised to hear from me again so soon. "I need you to draft a new motion," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "And I need you to contact the forensic accounting unit at the district attorney's office, the DA." Jameson asked, his tone shifting to alarm. "Tiana, what is going on?" "We were just talking about an internal audit. The scope has changed," I said, watching the last page of the report slide out of the printer. It was a photo of Terrence kissing Chloe in the elevator of her building. "I am not just firing him, Jameson. I am pressing charges. I want him arrested. And I want it to happen at the office." I hung up the phone. I picked up the stack of warm papers. I could feel the weight of them in my hands. It felt heavier than the slap. It felt heavier than the years of insults. I looked at the clock. It was 2 in the afternoon. They would be back from the mall soon, expecting to find a submissive wife ironing shirts. Instead, they were going to find an empty house. I packed the laptop. I packed the papers. I walked out of the office and locked the door. I went to the front hall closet and pulled out my coat. As I buttoned it, I looked at myself in the mirror. The bruise on my cheek was dark and ugly, but the look in my eyes, it was lethal. I was done being the victim. I was done being the scapegoat. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows was idling at the curb. The driver, a large man in a dark suit, stepped out and opened the rear door for me. "Miss Carter?" he asked. "Yes," I said, sliding into the leather seat that smelled of expensive detailing. "Where to take me to the penthouse?" I said, "and then get me the police commissioner on the line." The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the rental house behind. I didn't look back. I was moving forward. "Terrence." He was about to find out that the only thing worse than a woman scorned is a woman who owns the bank. The leather seat of the SUV was cool against my legs, a sharp contrast to the burning heat of betrayal that was currently consuming my chest. As the driver navigated through the afternoon traffic toward the city center, I opened the manila folder again. My hands were steady, but my stomach was churning with a nausea that had nothing to do with the motion of the car. I needed to see her face. I needed to see the recipient of the life that was supposed to be mine. I pulled out the photograph clipped to page 5 of the investigator's report. Her name was Chloe Miller, 22 years old. Fresh out of college with a degree in communications and a smile that looked like it had been purchased at a discount orthodontist. I recognized her immediately. 6 months ago, Terrence had brought her to a company mixer. He had introduced her to me as his new executive assistant, praising her work ethic and her eagerness to learn. I remembered shaking her hand. I remembered her looking at me with wide, innocent eyes, calling me Mrs. Carter, with a deference that I now realized was a performance. She wasn't just his assistant. She was his exit strategy. I flipped to the financial documents. The forensic accountant had done a thorough job tracking the flow of the embezzled funds. Terrence had been clever, or so he thought. He had created a shell vendor called CM Consulting. Every month, Apex Solutions paid CM Consulting $4,000 for marketing retainers. And every month, CM Consulting paid the rent on a luxury one-bedroom apartment in the Element building in Buckhead. I knew that building. It had a rooftop pool, a 24-hour concierge, and valet parking. The rent was more than what Terrence claimed our entire household budget was. I sat back, letting the reality wash over me. For 3 years, Terrence had told me we couldn't afford to buy a house. He told me we had to be prudent. He told me that my desire for a vacation was selfish because we were saving for our future. But there was no future. There was only Chloe. He was using the dividends from my shares, the money that I had reinvested into the company, to help it grow, to house a woman 10 years my junior. He was playing house with her using my bricks. The audacity was so staggering that it almost felt impressive. He was not just a cheater, he was a parasite. He had latched onto my hidden wealth via the company siphoned off the nutrients and used them to feed his ego and his mistress. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down at the screen. It was Jessica. I debated letting it go to voicemail. I had already kicked her out of my house. I had already taken the first steps to destroy her brother's life. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to know what she had to say. I wanted to hear the tone of her voice one last time before I pulled the rug out from under her entire world. I swiped right and put the phone to my ear. "Hello, Jessica," I said, my voice flat. "I just wanted to make sure you were cooling off," Jessica said. Her voice was too bright, too chirpy. It had that distinct tone of someone who has bad news and is delighted to deliver it. "We are at the mall. Terrence is in a mood, of course. He is looking at watches. Poor guy. He works so hard and he just wants a little reward." "I am sure he does," I said, looking at the photo of Chloe. "You know," Tiana Jessica continued, and I could hear the rustling of shopping bags in the background. "We were just talking about you. Terrence loves you, he really does. But you have to understand that a man in his position has needs. He has a lot of stress. High-powered executives like him need an outlet. They need energy. They need vitality. I tightened my grip on the phone. I knew exactly where she was going with this. What are you trying to say, Jessica? I am just saying that you have been looking a little tired lately, she purred. A little worn down. Marriage is hard work, and let's be honest, you are not 20 anymore. None of us are. But Terrence is in his prime. He attracts attention. She paused for dramatic effect. I saw him the other day, actually. For lunch. He was with that new assistant of his. What is her name, Chloe? My heart stopped, then restarted with a cold, rhythmic thud. She knew. Oh, I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Yes, Jessica said, her voice dripping with poison. She is such a sweet girl, so young, so fresh. She was hanging on his every word. They looked comfortable. I am not saying anything is going on, of course, but standing next to her, Terrence looked 10 years younger. It just made me think, Tiana, maybe if you put a little more effort in, maybe if you tried to be more fun, more exciting, he wouldn't need to seek that validation elsewhere. There it was. The knife in the back twisted with a smile. Jessica wasn't just hinting. She was confirming that the family knew. She had seen them together. She had likely seen the way he looked at her. And instead of telling me, instead of warning her sister-in-law, she was using it as a weapon to make me feel insecure. She was weaponizing his infidelity to put me in my place. She was telling me that I was old, that I was boring, that I was replaceable. She thought she was hurting me. She thought she was planting a seed of doubt that would make me scramble to the gym or the hair salon to compete for her brother's affection. She had no idea that she had just confirmed the final element of my plan. If the family knew, then the family was complicit. They were enjoying the fruits of his embezzlement, and they were covering up his affair because they thought I was too stupid to notice and too poor to leave. You are right, Jessica, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. I am. She sounded surprised. Yes, I have been looking tired. It is exhausting carrying dead weight. And you are right about Terrence needing youthful energy. I hope Chloe has plenty of it. What do you mean? Jessica asked, her tone shifting from mockery to confusion. I mean that he is going to need a lot of support, I said, because life is about to get very real for him, and for you. Did you buy anything nice with the car keys I gave you? Well, yes, Jessica stammered. I am looking at some shoes right now. Good, I said. Enjoy them. Walking is hard on the feet. I hung up the phone before she could respond. I stared out the window as the skyline of Atlanta rose up to meet us. The pain of the betrayal was still there, a dull ache in my chest where my heart used to be. But it was being rapidly replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. They thought I was the aging, tired wife who would cling to her husband out of fear of being alone. They thought Chloe was the prize. They thought the apartment in Buckhead was a symbol of Terrence's status. They were wrong. Chloe wasn't a prize, she was a liability. The apartment wasn't a love nest, it was a crime scene. And Jessica. She wasn't a confidant, she was a co-conspirator. I looked at the driver's reflection in the rearview mirror. Change of plans, I said. Yes, Miss Carter. Do not go to the penthouse yet, I said. Take me to the Element building in Buckhead. I want to see this investment property with my own eyes before I hand the keys over to the FBI. The driver nodded and merged into the left lane. I picked up the file again. I looked at the photo of Terrence and Chloe one last time. He looked happy. He looked powerful. He looked like a man who thought he had gotten away with it. Jessica had called me old. She had called me tired. She was about to find out that I wasn't tired. I was dormant, and she had just poked the sleeping dragon. I put the phone away and smoothed the skirt of my dress. I checked my reflection in the compact mirror. The bruise on my cheek was still there, but my eyes were bright. They were sharp. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a CEO who was about to conduct a hostile takeover of her own life. I was going to visit Chloe, and I wasn't going to bring a housewarming gift. I was going to bring the truth. And for a girl like that, the truth was going to be far more expensive than any handbag Terrence had bought her with my money. I walked into the kitchen, and the atmosphere was so thick with malice I could taste it. It tasted like bitter coffee and cheap cologne. Terrence was sitting at the granite island, the same island I had paid to have installed 3 months ago, though he told his friends he picked out the stone himself. He wasn't alone. Sitting next to him was a man I had never met, but I recognized his type immediately. He was wearing a navy blue suit that was slightly too shiny under the kitchen pendant lights, and a gold watch that looked heavy, but probably rattled if you shook your wrist too hard. This was Lionel Sterling. I knew of him. He was a strip mall lawyer known for aggressive billboards on the interstate and a reputation for helping unfaithful husbands hide assets during divorce proceedings. The fact that Terrence had hired him told me two things. One, Terrence was desperate, and two, Terrence was cheap. Terrence didn't look up when I entered. He just gestured to the empty bar stool opposite them, like a king summoning a peasant to court. "Sit down," Tiana Terrence said, his voice devoid of the earlier rage. Now it was just cold, calculated, or at least what he thought passed for calculation. "We need to have a grown-up conversation about our future. Or rather, my future and your lack of a place in it." I placed my purse on the counter, keeping it close. I sat down, folding my hands in my lap. I looked at Lionel Sterling. He offered me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a shark's smile, predatory and dismissive. "Mrs. Carter," Lionel began, his voice oily and smooth, "I am representing your husband in this matter. We have drafted a preliminary agreement to expedite the dissolution of your marriage. Terrence is a man on the rise, and he needs to ensure that his personal life does not become a distraction to his professional ascent." He slid a thick stack of papers across the cool stone counter. The document stopped inches from my hands. The cover page read, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." I looked at the paperwork, then back at Terrence. "You want a divorce?" I stated flatly. "I want freedom," Terrence corrected finally, looking me in the eye. "I want to be with someone who matches my ambition, someone who doesn't embarrass me in front of CEOs, someone who doesn't possess your limitations." Lionel tapped the document with a manicured finger. "We have prepared a settlement offer, Mrs. Carter, and I strongly suggest you read it carefully. It is extremely generous considering the circumstances." I didn't open the folder. I didn't need to. I could see the terms written in the smug set of their jaws. "What are the terms?" I asked. Lionel cleared his throat. "You will vacate this property within 48 hours. You will waive all rights to spousal support or alimony, given the short duration of the marriage and your husband's financial strain. You will retain your personal effects, meaning your clothing and small items, but all furniture, electronics, and vehicles purchased during the marriage will remain with Mr. Carter." I stared at them. They wanted to kick me out of my own house. They wanted to keep the furniture I bought. They wanted me to walk away with nothing but the clothes on my back. And Lionel added, his voice dropping an octave, becoming more serious. "There is a non-disclosure agreement attached to the final page. You will sign it, agreeing never to speak about Mr. Carter, his employment at Apex Solutions, or any details of your private life. You will not post on social media. You will not speak to his colleagues. You will disappear quietly." "And if I don't sign," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Terrence leaned forward then. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment he thought he would crush me. "If you don't sign, Tiana, we go to court," Terrence said. "And if we go to court, I will have to explain to the judge why you are unfit. I will have to explain your history." "My history?" I asked. "Your mental instability." Terrence said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. The air left the room. "We know about Dr. Evans." Tiana Terrence continued, watching my face for a reaction. "We know you spent 6 months in intensive therapy after your grandmother died. We know you were on medication for anxiety. We know you had episodes." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. When my grandmother died, I was devastated. She was my rock, my only family. I had seen a grief counselor. I had taken medication to help me sleep for 2 weeks. It was normal. It was human. I had confided in Terrence during our first year of marriage because I trusted him. I thought I was sharing my pain with my partner. I didn't know I was handing him ammunition. Lionel chimed in, leaning back in his chair. "In the state of Georgia, Mrs. Carter, mental incapacity is a strong argument in divorce proceedings. If we have to subpoena your medical records, we will. If we have to bring Dr. Evans to the stand to testify about your fragile state, we will. We will paint a picture of a woman who is unhinged, a woman who hallucinates, a woman who attacks her husband at corporate galas because she is off her meds." The lie was so bold, so monstrous, that it took my breath away. They were going to use my grief against me. They were going to gaslight the entire legal system into thinking I was crazy so they could steal everything I had and protect Terrence's reputation. Terrence looked at me with mock sympathy. I don't want to do that to you, Tiana. I don't want the world to know you are crazy. Just sign the papers. Pack your bags. Go back to whatever hood you crawled out of. Let me live my life, and I will keep your secret. I looked at the document. I looked at the man I had married. He wasn't just a thief. He was a monster. He was willing to destroy my sanity to save his vanity. He was willing to label me legally insane just to avoid paying alimony he couldn't afford anyway. The kitchen was silent. The refrigerator hummed. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. They expected tears. They expected begging. They expected me to grab the pen with shaking hands and sign my life away just to stop them from exposing my pain. But they had made a critical error. They assumed that my grief was weakness. They didn't understand that grief, when processed, turns into iron. They didn't understand that the therapy hadn't just healed me, it had sharpened me. I looked at Lionel Sterling. I wondered if he knew that his client was an embezzler. I wondered if he knew that the house he was sitting in was owned by a trust that listed me as the sole beneficiary. I reached out and placed my hand on the divorce papers. The paper felt cool under my fingertips. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice steady, surprising them both. If I don't sign this and leave with nothing, you are going to tell the world I am crazy. That is the reality of the situation, Lionel said, shrugging. And you, Terrence, I said, turning to my husband, you are okay with this. You are okay with lying to a judge about my mental health. I am doing what I have to do to protect myself, Terrence said, looking away for a split second. You brought this on yourself. I nodded slowly. I didn't open the folder. I didn't pick up the pen. I stood up. I need a moment, I said. A decision like this, it requires consideration. Take all the time you need, Lionel said, checking his cheap watch, as long as you sign before I leave. I walked to the sink. I poured myself a glass of water. My back was to them. I needed them to think I was breaking. I needed them to think I was cornered. In reality, I was smiling. They had just played their trump card. They had threatened the nuclear option. And in doing so, they had given me the moral permission to do absolutely anything I wanted to them. I wasn't going to sign their papers, but I was going to give them a document. I took a sip of water. The cool liquid calmed the fire in my throat. I turned back to face them. Actually, I said, I don't think I will be signing this today. Terrence slammed his hand on the counter. Don't play games with me, Tiana. I am not playing Terrence, I said, walking back to the island. But since we are exchanging legal documents, and since you brought your lawyer, this actually saves me a trip. I reached into my bag. I didn't pull out a tissue. I didn't pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a thick blue folder that I had prepared with Jameson just an hour ago. I think you should look at this before you threaten me with Dr. Evans, I said, sliding the blue folder across the counter. It collided with his divorce papers, pushing them aside. What is this? Lionel asked, frowning. Open it, I said. Terrence looked at me, confusion clouding his arrogance. He reached out and flipped open the blue folder. I watched his eyes scan the first page. I watched the color drain from his face. I watched his mouth open, then close, then open again. It wasn't a divorce petition. It was a forensic audit report of Apex Solutions. And on the top page, highlighted in neon yellow, was a wire transfer of $12,000 to an account named Sterling Legal Services. I looked at Lionel. You accepted legal fees from a corporate account that doesn't belong to your client, Mr. Sterling, I said softly. That is called money laundering, and I believe that is a disparable offense. The silence that followed was not the silence of a victim being crushed. It was the silence of a predator realizing he had just stepped into a bear trap. Terrence looked at the lawyer looked at the document, and I just stood there waiting for the screaming to start. The death trap had been sprung, but they were the ones inside it. The kitchen was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the shallow, panicked breathing that I was forcing myself to perform. Lionel Sterling, the shark in the cheap suit, was staring down at the blue folder I had just slid across the island. His face, previously flushed with arrogance, had drained of all color. He was looking at a wire transfer record that linked his law firm directly to a shell company funded by embezzled money. He knew exactly what that meant. It meant disbarment. It meant prison. Terrence, however, was too blinded by his own ego to see the precipice he was standing on. He saw his lawyer go quiet, and he assumed it was because I had presented something ridiculous, something laughable. He didn't understand that the predator in the room had just become the prey. "What is this garbage?" Terrence barked, reaching for the blue folder. "Is this your attempt at blackmail? You think some printed internet pages are going to stop me from taking what is mine?" Lionel's hand shot out, clamping down on Terrence's wrist. His grip was tight, desperate. "Don't touch it." "Terrence." Lionel whispered, his voice straining to remain calm. Terrence looked at him confused. "Why? What did she give you?" "It is complex," Lionel stammered, his eyes darting between me and the document. He looked at me with a new expression. It wasn't fear yet, it was calculation. He was wondering how much I knew, how much I had copied, and if he could destroy this copy before it saw the light of day. I knew this was the pivot point. If I stayed strong, if I kept the CEO persona, they might panic, they might get violent, they might destroy the evidence right there in the kitchen sink. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to think that despite this one moment of boldness, I was still the fragile, broken woman they could crush. I let my shoulders slump. I let my bottom lip tremble. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, forcing a tear to squeeze out and roll down the bruised side of my cheek. "I don't want to go back to Dr. Evans," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. Terrence's head snapped toward me. The smell of fear on me was like blood in the water to him. He forgot about the blue folder. He focused on his favorite weapon, my trauma. "Then do the right thing," Tiana, Terrence said, his voice softening into that manipulative, fake soothing tone he used when he wanted something. "We don't want to hurt you. We don't want to tell everyone that you are hearing voices again. We just want this to be over." I looked down at the countertop, breathing rapidly, hyperventilating just enough to make my chest heave. I gripped the edge of the island until my knuckles turned white. "I can't handle the court," I stammered. "I can't handle people looking at me. Please, Terrence, if I give you what you want, will you promise to destroy those medical records? Will you promise not to tell the board? I am crazy." Terrence smiled. It was a wide, triumphant grin. He looked at Lionel, seeking approval. "See? I told you she would fold." Lionel was still staring at the blue folder, sweat beading on his forehead, but he nodded slowly. "Get her to sign, Terrence. And get that folder back. We need to dispose of these misunderstandings." Terrence slid the divorce decree toward me again. He uncapped a heavy, expensive fountain pen and held it out. "Sign it, Tiana. Sign it and you can walk away. We will keep your secrets." I reached for the pen. My hand was shaking violently. I made sure they saw the tremors. I wanted them to see a woman on the verge of a breakdown. I wanted them to see a wife who was terrified of losing her reputation, not a majority shareholder who was about to liquidate them. I took the pen. I looked at the divorce papers. Then I looked at the blue folder that Lionel was still guarding with his hand. I need a copy of that," I said, pointing to the blue folder with the pen. "For my records. To remind me why I am leaving." Lionel narrowed his eyes. "No copies. This stays with us." "Then I need to sign for it," I said, my voice rising in panic. "My grandmother. She always said to sign for everything. If I don't sign for it, how do I know you won't use it against me later? I need to acknowledge that I gave it to you. Please, just let me sign the receipt." I was babbling, sounding irrational, sounding like the crazy woman they wanted me to be. Terrence rolled his eyes. "Just let her sign the damn receipt, Lionel. She is obsessing. Let's just get this done so I can get a drink." Lionel hesitated, but the pressure was too high. He wanted to get out of this house. He wanted to get that incriminating bank transfer record into a shredder. He reached into the back of the blue folder and pulled out the last page. It was a standard acknowledgement of receipt form. Whatever Lionel spat. Sign the receipt. Then sign the divorce papers. Then get out. He pushed the receipt toward me. I looked at the paper. It was a simple document. It stated that the undersigned acknowledged receipt of the attached forensic audit and legal notice regarding financial misconduct. By signing it and by taking possession of the folder, they were legally admitting that they had been served with the evidence of their crimes. They were admitting they had seen it. They could never claim in court that they were unaware of the embezzlement charges. I lowered the pen to the paper. I didn't sign the divorce decree. I pushed that aside. I pressed the pen to the receipt. I signed my name, Tiana Carter. The signature was shaky, jagged, the handwriting of a woman in distress. There I sobbed, dropping the pen. I signed it. Take it. Just take it all. I pushed the signed receipt and the entire blue folder toward Terrence. He didn't check what I had signed. He was too eager. He was too arrogant. He grabbed the blue folder, checking to make sure the damning bank transfer record was inside. He grabbed the signed receipt, assuming it was part of his victory lap. He didn't even look at the divorce papers I had ignored. In his mind, he had won. He had the evidence I tried to use against him, and he had my submission. Done, Terrence said, clutching the folder to his chest like a prize. He stood up, adjusting his jacket. He looked down at me one last time. You made the right choice, Tiana. You were never built for this world. You are weak. And frankly, you are boring. I am doing you a favor setting you free. Lionel stood up too, shoving his papers into his briefcase. He looked pale but relieved. He thought he had dodged a bullet. He thought he could go back to his office and shred the evidence I had just handed him. We are leaving, Lionel said abruptly. We will file the paperwork in the morning. Terrence laughed. He walked to the door, stepping over the threshold with a bounce in his step. He held the blue folder high in the air, waving it mockingly at me. Goodbye, Tiana. Don't be here when I get back. I stayed frozen on the stool until the front door slammed shut. I heard the lock click. I heard their footsteps fading down the walkway. Then, and only then, did I move. I reached for the glass of water and took a long, slow sip. My hand was as steady as a rock. The trembling stopped instantly. The tears dried on my face, leaving tight tracks of salt. I stood up and walked to the window. I pulled back the curtain just an inch. I watched Terrence get into Lionel's car. He was laughing. He was patting the blue folder on his lap. He had no idea. He thought he was carrying away my leverage. In reality, he was carrying a certified signed confession of service to the district attorney. By taking that folder and that signed receipt, he had legally accepted the notification of the audit. He had just walked out of my house carrying the rope that would hang him. And the best part, I hadn't signed the divorce papers. I hadn't waived my rights to anything. I was still his wife. I was still the majority shareholder. And I was still the owner of the house he thought he was kicking me out of. I watched the car drive away. I let a small, genuine smile touch my lips. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was the smile of a chess player who just watched their opponent capture a pawn, not realizing they had left their king exposed. Go ahead, Terrence, I whispered to the empty street. Drive fast. You are just delivering the evidence for me. I turned back to the empty kitchen. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was expectant. I picked up my phone. I dialed Jameson. Did they take the bait? Jameson asked immediately. Hook, line, and sinker, I said, my voice cool and commanding. He took the folder. He took the receipt. He thinks he won. Excellent, Jameson said. The trap is set. I will notify the board that the CMO has been served. The meeting is scheduled for 9:00 a.m. Monday. I hung up. I looked around the kitchen one last time. I wouldn't be here when he got back. I had a penthouse to inspect, and I had a company to take over. The silent resistance was over. The war had just begun. The bass of the hip-hop music was shaking the frames of the family photos in the hallway photos that Terrence had long ago demanded we take down because they didn't match the modern aesthetic he wanted. It was Sunday night, 24 hours after the gala disaster and 12 hours before the board meeting that would end his career. But Terrence wasn't preparing a defense. He wasn't reviewing the audit papers I had tricked him into accepting. Instead, he was throwing a party. He called it a pre-celebration. In his delusional mind, the meeting on Monday morning wasn't a disciplinary hearing. He had convinced himself and everyone in our living room that Mr. Henderson was retiring and handing him the keys to the kingdom. He thought the blue folder was just a formality, a hurdle he had cleared by bullying me into silence. The house was packed with people I barely knew. There were junior executives from Apex Solutions looking to curry favor with the next boss. There were Terrence's college friends who were just as loud and arrogant as he was. And of course there was his family. I was not a guest at this party. I was the help. Terrence had made that very clear an hour before the guests arrived. He had come into the kitchen where I was quietly reading a book and kicked my chair. "People are coming over," he had said. "I need you to make yourself useful. Since I am letting you stay here for another 48 hours before the divorce kicks in, you can earn your keep. Pass the hors d'oeuvres, keep the drinks filled. And for God's sake, don't speak unless spoken to. I don't need you depressing the room with your energy." So there I was, weaving through a crowd of strangers in my own home, holding a silver tray of crab cakes that I had paid for. I was wearing a simple black dress, blending into the background like a shadow. I watched Terrence holding court by the fireplace. He was holding a glass of scotch, one hand in his pocket, looking every bit the successful executive he pretended to be. To the new era of Apex Solutions, Terrence toasted, raising his glass high. To Terrence, the room shouted back. He beamed, drinking in the adoration. "I am telling you guys," he said, his voice carrying over the music. "Mr. Henderson is old school. He is a dinosaur. He built the company, sure, but he doesn't know how to scale. The board knows it. That is why they called this meeting. They want fresh blood. They want vision. And tomorrow, when I walk out of that boardroom, I am going to be the man signing the checks." I stood in the corner, clutching the tray so hard my fingers ached. The irony was suffocating. He was right about one thing. The board did want fresh blood, but it was his blood they were coming for. And the person signing the checks, that would be me. Tiana Terrence's voice cut through my thoughts. I looked up. He was snapping his fingers at me from across the room. "We are out of ice," he shouted, not bothering to walk over. "And Kevin needs another beer. Chop, chop." A few people chuckled. I saw the look in their eyes. It wasn't just dismissal. It was pity mixed with contempt. They saw a woman being ordered around like a servant in her own home. They saw a wife who had been totally conquered. I walked to the kitchen, refilled the ice bucket, and grabbed a beer for Kevin. When I returned, Kevin didn't even say thank you. He just snatched the bottle from my hand without looking at me, continuing his conversation about a sports bet he was sure was a lock. I turned to leave, to retreat back to the sanctuary of the kitchen, but a hand shot out and grabbed my arm. It was Jessica. She was sitting on the white velvet armchair, the one I had specifically asked people not to eat or drink on. She was holding a large glass of red wine. She was wearing a pair of strappy designer heels that looked suspiciously brand new. I knew immediately she had bought them with the money she got from pawning something or maxing out a card she thought Terrence would pay off. "Well, look who it is," Jessica slurred slightly. Her eyes were glassy. "The maid." I pulled my arm away gently. "Hello, Jessica. You know she said loud enough for the circle of women around her to hear. I was just telling the girls how generous Terrence is, letting you stay here after everything you did. Most men would have kicked you to the curb last night. You really should be more grateful. You are walking around here with a face like a funeral. Smile, Tiana. It is a party." I looked at her. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at her with the blank, hollow expression of someone who is checked out. "I am just doing my job." "Jessica," I said softly. "Your job." She laughed, a harsh, cackling sound. "Yeah, I guess that is all you are good for now. Serving us." She went to take a sip of her wine, but she did it with a theatrical flourish, throwing her head back. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was intentional, but her hand jerked, the glass tilted. A wave of dark red Cabernet splashed out of the goblet. It didn't hit the chair. It didn't hit the rug. It splashed directly onto her brand new shoes and splattered onto the floor right in front of me. "Oops," Jessica squealed, jumping up. "My shoes? My God, these are Italian leather." The room went quiet. Terrence walked over, seeing the commotion. "What happened?" he asked. "Your clumsy wife bumped into me." Jessica lied instantly, pointing a finger at me. I was just sitting here and she bumped my arm. Look at my shoes, Terrence. They are ruined. And look at the rug, I hadn't touched her. I was standing 3 feet away. But the truth didn't matter in this house. The narrative did. Terrence looked at the wine stain on the white rug. Then he looked at me. His eyes were cold, devoid of any affection. "Clean it up," Terrence ordered. I looked at him. "Excuse me," I said. "Clean it up, Tiana. You made the mess. You fix it." "I didn't do it," I said quietly. "Don't lie to me," Terrence roared, causing the music to stop. Everyone was watching now. This was the show. This was him asserting his dominance for his audience. Get a towel, get on your knees, and clean up the mess. And while you are down there, wipe off Jessica's shoes. She shouldn't have to suffer because you are clumsy. I looked around the room. 70 people. Not one person spoke up. Not one person said, "Terrence, that is too far." They just watched, fascinated by the cruelty. I looked at Jessica. She was smirking, extending her foot forward like Cinderella waiting for the slipper, except she wanted me to be the rag. This was the test. This was the final layer of humiliation. They wanted to break my spirit completely before they discarded me. I could have refused. I could have thrown the tray of crab cakes in his face. I could have announced right then that I owned the house and told them all to get out. But I remembered the art of war. Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake, and never strike until the blow is fatal. If I refused, he would drag me out. There would be a scene. He would play the victim, but if I did it, if I knelt, I would be the ultimate martyr, and his fall would be that much steeper. I walked to the kitchen. I grabbed a white towel. I walked back to the living room. I knelt down on the hard floor. I felt the eyes of everyone on me. I dipped the towel into the club soda I had brought. I started dabbing the rug, then I turned to Jessica. She held her foot out, wiggling her toes. "Make sure you get the heel, Tiana. It is sticky." I took her foot in my hand. It felt cold. I wiped the wine from the leather strap. I wiped the red droplets from her skin. I cleaned her shoe while she stood over me laughing with her friends. "That is a good look for you, Tiana," Terrence said, standing over me with his scotch. "On your knees. That is where you belong." I finished cleaning the shoe. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking in the silence. I held the dirty red-stained towel in my hand. It looked like blood. I looked Terrence in the eye. "Is there anything else, sir?" I asked. "No," he said, turning his back on me. "Get out of my sight. Go to your room." I walked away. I walked past the staring faces. I walked up the stairs, clutching the dirty towel. I went into the guest room and locked the door. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked to the mirror and looked at myself. I looked at the woman who had just knelt before her tormentors. "Enjoy the party, Terrence," I whispered to my reflection. "Enjoy the power, because that was the last time anyone will ever serve you." I looked at the clock. It was 10 p.m., 11 hours. I went to the closet and pulled out my outfit for tomorrow. It wasn't a maid's uniform. It was a power suit. Balmain, sharp shoulders, gold buttons. I laid it out on the bed. Tonight I cleaned their shoes. Tomorrow I would wipe the floor with them. The party was reaching its peak. The music was loud, the laughter was forced, and the champagne was flowing freely. Too freely. Terrence, in his infinite arrogance, had ordered 5 extra cases of Dom Perignon midway through the night to impress a couple of board members who hadn't even shown up. He was playing the part of the generous king, raining expensive alcohol down on his subjects. I watched from the top of the stairs, hidden in the shadows of the landing. I wasn't sulking. I was waiting. I knew something that Terrence didn't. I knew that the audit notification he had so carelessly accepted earlier that day had triggered an automatic protocol within the company's finance department. It was a standard procedure during a forensic investigation: freeze all discretionary spending accounts associated with the person under review. The catering manager, a stern woman named Brenda, who didn't care about corporate titles, approached Terrence near the fireplace. The music was still thumping, but I could see the shift in body language. She held out a digital tablet. It was time to settle the bill for the extra alcohol and the extended service hours. The total was likely over $4,000. I watched Terrence smile that charming plastic smile. He didn't even look at the total. He just reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the heavy black American Express card. It was the corporate card, the card he used for everything. The card he used to pay for Chloe's apartment. The card he used to pay for Kevin's gambling debts. And now the card he was using to pay for a party celebrating a promotion he was never going to get. He tapped the card on the machine with a flourish, continuing his conversation with a junior executive while he waited for the transaction to process. There was a pause. Then a sharp, dissonant beep cut through the noise. Brenda looked at the machine, then at Terrence. "I am sorry, sir," she said, her voice loud enough to be heard over the bass. It was declined. Terrence frowned, looking annoyed rather than worried. "That is impossible," he laughed, waving his hand dismissively. "It is a corporate black card. It has no limit. Try it again. You probably just have a bad connection in here." Brenda sighed, clearly used to men who thought their credit limits were as infinite as their egos. She inserted the chip this time. I held my breath. This was the first crack in the dam. The machine thought for a moment. Then another beep, louder this time. "Declined," Brenda stated flatly. "The message says, pick up card, fraud alert." "Sir, do you have another form of payment?" The conversation in the immediate circle died down. The junior executive Terrence had been bragging to took a sip of his drink, looking away awkwardly. Jessica, who was standing nearby showing off her wine-stained shoes as a badge of honor, froze. Terrence's face went from annoyed to flushed. "There is something wrong with your machine," he snapped, his voice rising. "That card is linked to Apex Solutions. I am the CMO. Do you know who I am?" "I know who you are, sir," Brenda said, her patience wearing thin. "But the bank says no, and I need $4,200 right now, or I am instructing my staff to start collecting the bottles." Panic flickered in Terrence's eyes. He patted his pockets. He knew he didn't have another card. His personal cards were maxed out. I had seen the statements. He was living entirely on the company dime. He looked around the room, desperate to save face. He couldn't let his guests know that the future CEO couldn't even pay for drinks. He turned to Jessica. "Jess," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded like a bark. "My card has a security hold on it, probably because I bought so much stock earlier today. The bank gets nervous when you move big money around. Can you cover this? I will wire you the cash first thing in the morning." Jessica's eyes widened. She took a step back. "Me, yes you," Terrence hissed, leaning in close so only she could hear, though I could read his lips perfectly from the landing. "Just pay it. I will pay you back double tomorrow. Don't embarrass me." Jessica looked at the catering manager. She looked at the guests who were starting to whisper. She looked at her husband, Kevin, who was uselessly staring at his phone. She was trapped. If she said no, she admitted she was broke. If she admitted she was broke, her entire persona of the wealthy socialite crumbled. She reached into her purse with a shaking hand. She pulled out a card. It wasn't a black card. It was a standard bank debit card. I knew that card. I knew that Jessica and Kevin were currently living on overdraft protection. I knew that swiping this card was going to cost her $35 in fees and push her account into the negative hundreds. She handed the card to Brenda. Her hand was trembling. Brenda ran the card. The seconds stretched out like hours. Jessica bit her lip. Her eyes squeezed shut, praying to the gods of insufficient funds. "Approved," Brenda said, tearing off the receipt. Jessica let out a breath that sounded like a sob. She signed the receipt quickly, snatching her card back as if it had burned her. Terrence clapped his hands, turning back to the room. "See? Just a technical glitch." "Technical glitch. Keep drinking, everyone." The music came back up, but the energy had shifted. The illusion had flickered. People were whispering. I saw the junior executive lean over to a colleague and whisper something while pointing at Terrence. They weren't looking at him with admiration anymore. They were looking at him with suspicion. Terrence grabbed Jessica by the elbow and dragged her into the hallway directly beneath where I was standing. "What was that?" Jessica hissed, pulling her arm away. Her voice was trembling with rage. "That was $4,000, Terrence. I am overdrawn. I am completely overdrawn." "You better transfer that money tonight. I told you it is a freeze," Terrence whispered furiously. "The bank is just being cautious. I will fix it in the morning. Stop acting like a pauper. I am not acting, Jessica screamed in a whisper. We are broke, Terrence. Kevin lost everything on the game last week. We were banking on your bonus to pay the rent. And now I just spent our grocery money on champagne for people I don't even like. Keep your voice down, Terrence growled, looking over his shoulder. You want them to hear you. You want them to know you are failures. Failures, Jessica spat back. At least my card worked. What kind of CEO gets his card declined at his own party? What is really going on? Terrence, nothing is going on. Terrence shouted, his control slipping. It is Tiana. It is that witch. She probably called the bank and reported it lost just to spite me. Jessica looked up toward the stairs. She didn't see me, but she glared at the ceiling. She is ruining everything, Jessica said, her voice dripping with venom. First the shoes, now this. You need to get rid of her, Terrence. You need to get her out of this house before she destroys us. She is gone tomorrow. Terrence promised, wiping sweat from his forehead. Once I get the promotion, I will have access to the executive discretionary fund. I will pay you back 10 times over. Just keep smiling. Just keep them happy. Jessica smoothed her dress, taking a deep, shaky breath. She looked at her brother with fear in her eyes. You better be right, Terrence, because if that money doesn't come through tomorrow, Kevin and I are on the street. They walked back into the party, plastering fake smiles onto their faces. They looked like actors in a tragedy who had forgotten their lines, but refused to leave the stage. I stood up and walked back to my bedroom. They were eating each other alive. The financial stress was the acid that was dissolving their loyalty. Jessica had just spent money she didn't have to protect a lie that was already dead. Terrence was blaming me, blaming the bank, blaming everyone but himself. I walked to my desk and opened my laptop. I logged into the company admin portal again. I saw the alert for the declined transaction. Attempted charge $4,200, merchant elite catering, status denied, account frozen, forensic hold. I smiled. Then I saw another alert. Attempted charge Uber Black, status denied. He couldn't even call a ride. I closed the laptop. Tomorrow morning he wasn't going to be able to swipe his badge to get into the building. But before that, he had a long, sobering night ahead of him. And Jessica. She was going to wake up to an overdraft fee notification that would ruin her morning coffee. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. It was raining inside their house, and they had just sold their umbrellas to buy champagne. I turned off the light and went to sleep. I needed my rest. Being the executioner requires a steady hand. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of the master bedroom, casting long, pale beams of light onto the wreckage of the previous night. The house smelled like a dive bar. The sour stench of stale champagne, spilled beer, and regret hung heavy in the air. The white rug in the living room was still stained pink from Jessica's wine, a permanent scar on the floor. I was already awake. In fact, I hadn't really slept. I was sitting at the small vanity table in the guest room, applying my makeup with the precision of a soldier applying war paint. I watched my own reflection. My eyes were clear. My hand was steady. Today was the day. I heard the heavy thud of Terrence's feet hitting the floor upstairs. Then came the groan of a man waking up to a hangover and a delusion. I walked into the kitchen just as he stumbled down the stairs. He looked terrible. His skin was gray, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was wearing only his boxer briefs. He went straight to the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of water and chugging it like he was dying of thirst. He slammed the empty bottle onto the counter and looked at me. He didn't say good morning. He didn't apologize for forcing me to clean his sister's shoes. Coffee, he grunted. Black, strong. I moved to the coffee maker. I didn't argue. I poured the coffee into his favorite mug, the one that said, "World's Best Boss," a gift he had bought for himself. I handed it to him. He took a sip, grimacing as the hot liquid hit his system. Then his phone chimed from the counter where he had left it charging. It wasn't a text message tone. It was the specific, urgent ping of a high-priority corporate email. Terrence snatched the phone up. He squinted at the screen, his eyes widening as he read. "Yes," he shouted, slamming his hand onto the granite so hard the coffee mug jumped. "Yes, I knew it." He looked at me, a wild, maniacal grin spreading across his face. "Read it and weep, Tiana. Read it and see what a winner looks like." He shoved the phone in my face. I looked at the screen. The email was from the Secretary of the Board of Directors. Subject: mandatory emergency board meeting. Priority high. Topic: financial irregularities and senior leadership restructuring. Time: 9:00 a.m. sharp. I read the words. Financial irregularities, senior leadership restructuring. To any sane person, to anyone with a conscience, this email was a death knell. It screamed audit. It screamed investigation. It screamed termination. But Terrence saw what he wanted to see. They are finally doing it, he crowed, pacing around the kitchen island. They are restructuring. That means Henderson is out. The old man is finally retiring, and they are bringing in the new guard. Financial irregularities, ha! That is just corporate speak for Henderson's bad budgeting. They are going to pin the last quarter's losses on him and hand me the crown. He laughed, a sound that was half relief and half arrogance. I am going to be the CEO, Tiana. By noon today, I will be running the whole show. He looked at me with renewed contempt. He felt invincible again. The shame of the credit card decline was gone, replaced by the fantasy of unlimited power. Go upstairs, he commanded, pointing a finger at the ceiling. Get my white shirt, the Brooks Brothers one, and iron it. I want it crisp. I want the creases so sharp they could cut glass. If I'm going to be crowned king, I need to look the part. I walked upstairs. I went into the master closet, the space that smelled like him. I found the shirt. It was crumpled on the floor where he had thrown it days ago. I picked it up. I took it to the laundry room. I set up the ironing board. I plugged in the iron and waited for it to heat up. Hiss. The steam rose up. I laid the shirt flat. I pressed the hot metal against the cotton. I smoothed out the wrinkles. I focused on the task. I wasn't just ironing a shirt. I was preparing a shroud. This was the shirt he would wear to his execution. I wanted him to look perfect. I wanted him to feel confident, because the fall is always more devastating when you think you are flying. I took my time. I made sure the collar was stiff. I made sure the cuffs were perfect. When I came back downstairs, Terrence was showered and wearing his suit trousers. He was standing in front of the mirror in the hallway, practicing his acceptance face. He looked at me as I approached with the shirt on a hanger. About time, he snapped, snatching the hanger from me. He inspected the shirt critically. You missed a spot near the button, he muttered, though the shirt was flawless. Typical. You can't even do laundry right. It is a good thing I'm getting rid of you. I will hire a professional housekeeper next week. Someone who knows how to take care of luxury garments. He put the shirt on, buttoning it with swift, aggressive movements. He tucked it in. He adjusted his tie. He looked at himself in the mirror and smiled. He saw a titan of industry. I saw a dead man walking. He turned to me, adjusting his cufflinks. Now listen to me, Tiana, he said, his voice dropping to that patronizing tone he loved to use. I am going to this meeting. When I come back, I will be the CEO of Apex Solutions. My salary is going to triple. My bonus alone will be more than you have earned in your entire life. He took a step closer, invading my personal space. But don't think for a second that this changes anything for us. You are still out. In fact, you are more out than before. A CEO cannot be married to a nobody. I need a power couple image. I need someone like Chloe. He smirked at the mention of her name. But because I am a generous God, and because today is a good day, I have decided to be charitable. When I get back, I will write you a check, $500. Consider it your first month of alimony. It is more than you deserve, but I don't want you starving on the street immediately. It looks bad for my PR. $500. He was offering me $500 from a salary that was paid by my company. He was offering me crumbs from a loaf of bread that I owned. Thank you, Terrence, I said, my voice dangerously calm. You are very generous. He didn't hear the sarcasm. He just nodded, accepting the praise as his due. Right. Well, I am off. Don't wait up. I will probably be celebrating with the board until late. He grabbed his briefcase. He grabbed his car keys, the keys to the BMW that was technically reported stolen as of this morning, though the repo team likely wouldn't spot it until he parked at the office. He opened the front door. The morning air rushed in. Terrence, I called out. He stopped 1 foot out the door and looked back over his shoulder, annoyed. What now? I walked toward him. I was wearing my silk robe, but underneath my mind was already in a suit of armor. I will see you there, I said. He frowned, confused. "See me where?" "At the office," I said. "I am coming to the meeting too." He stared at me for a second, processing the words. Then his face broke into an incredulous, mocking grin. He laughed, a deep belly-shaking laugh that echoed in the quiet street. "You? Coming to the office?" He wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. "For what, Tiana? Did you finally decide to get a job?" He looked me up and down, shaking his head. "They don't need cleaners until after 5, honey. Or are you applying to be the lunch lady? Because I can put in a good word for you if you promise not to burn the toast." He laughed again, reveling in his own wit. "Stay home, Tiana. Watch some TV. Don't embarrass yourself. You don't belong in a boardroom. You belong in the kitchen." He stepped out, slamming the door in my face. I listened to his footsteps fade. I listened to the BMW start up. I waited until the sound of the engine disappeared. Then I dropped the robe. I walked to the closet and pulled out the garment bag I had hidden in the back. I unzipped it. Inside was a tailored navy blue Chanel suit. Sharp, professional, authoritative. I put it on. I buttoned the jacket. I stepped into my Louboutin heels. I picked up my leather portfolio, the one that contained the original copy of the forensic audit, the signed receipt of service, and the resolution to remove the chief marketing officer. I walked to the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't a cleaner. She wasn't a lunch lady, and she certainly wasn't a victim. I checked my lipstick. It was a deep blood red. "You are right, Terrence," I whispered to the empty house. "I don't belong in the kitchen. I belong at the head of the table." I walked out the front door. The black SUV was waiting. "Drive," I told the driver, "and don't stop until we get to the front entrance. The chairman is arriving." The elevator ride to the 40th floor of the Apex Solutions Tower usually took 45 seconds. I knew this because I had timed it during the initial building inspection 5 years ago when my grandmother's trust first acquired the controlling interest in the property. But today, sitting in the high-backed leather chair at the head of the boardroom table, time seemed to stand still. The room was a fortress of glass and steel suspended in the clouds above the Atlanta skyline. From my vantage point, the cars below looked like ants, exactly how Terrence had treated me for the last 3 years. But up here, the perspective was different. Up here, I was the giant. The conference room was dead silent. 12 members of the board of directors sat along the mahogany table. These were men and women who controlled millions of dollars, captains of industry, who did not waste time. Usually, a board meeting was a cacophony of typing, whispering, and paper shuffling. But today, nobody moved. They sat with their hands folded, their faces grim, their eyes fixed on the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, the chair where the accused would sit. To my right sat Mr. Henderson, the current CEO. He looked tired. He had built this company from the ground up, and watching it be hollowed out by a mid-level marketing director had broken his heart. He looked at me with a mixture of apology and respect. He knew who I was. He had known for years. He was the only one who knew that Tiana Carter, the woman Terrence mocked for clipping coupons, was actually the majority shareholder who signed off on his executive bonuses. To my left sat Jameson Davis, my attorney. He had the blue folder in front of him. The same blue folder I had handed to Terrence in my kitchen less than 24 hours ago. The folder Terrence had unknowingly carried out of the house like a trophy. I checked my watch. It was 9:05. Terrence was late. It was a power move. He wanted to make the board wait. He wanted to walk in when the tension was highest, assuming the silence would be in anticipation of his coronation. He wanted to make an entrance. And he certainly did. The heavy double doors at the far end of the room burst open. The sound shattered the silence like a gunshot. Terrence strode in, bringing a gust of arrogant energy with him. He was wearing the suit I had bought him. He was wearing the shirt I had ironed for him. He looked like $1 million, which was ironic considering he was about to be sued for $500,000. He didn't look at the table immediately. He was too busy performing. He was on his phone finishing a call that was likely fake, just to show us how busy and important he was. "I am telling you, buy the stock now," Terrence said loudly into the phone, laughing. "We are about to make history." "Yeah, talk soon." He hung up and shoved the phone into his pocket. He flashed a blinding white-toothed smile at the room, oblivious to the icy reception. Good morning, gentlemen and ladies, Terrence boomed, buttoning his jacket as he walked toward the foot of the table. Apologies for the delay. The traffic was a nightmare, and the security downstairs gave me a hard time with my new badge clearance. We will have to fix that when I take over. Efficiency starts at the front desk, right? He chuckled at his own joke. Nobody else laughed. Terrence reached the end of the table. He placed his hands on the back of the empty chair, leaning forward with the confidence of a man who believes he is untouchable. So he said, looking at Mr. Henderson, "Let's get this started. I assume we are here to discuss the transition. I have some ideas about the Q1 marketing strategy that I think will really—" He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes had finally traveled up the length of the long, polished table. He had been so focused on Mr. Henderson that he hadn't looked at the chairman's seat, the seat that was usually empty or occupied by the non-executive chairman. But today it was occupied by me. I was sitting with my back straight, my hands resting calmly on a leather portfolio. I was wearing the navy blue Chanel suit. My hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. I wasn't the wife in the apron. I was the architect of his demise. Terrence blinked. He squinted. He leaned forward, his brain rejecting the visual information it was receiving. For a moment he looked confused, like a computer trying to process a corrupted file. He looked at Mr. Henderson, then back at me. He looked at Jameson, then back at me. Then the confusion turned to rage. "What the hell is this?" Terrence shouted, his voice cracking. The veneer of the professional executive vanished instantly. The abuser came out. He pointed a shaking finger down the length of the table. "Tiana, what are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I didn't flinch. I just watched him, my face a mask of absolute indifference. "I asked you a question," Terrence yelled, slamming his hand on the table. "How did you get in here? Did you follow me? Are you stalking me now?" He turned to Mr. Henderson, his face turning a blotchy red. "I am so sorry, sir. This is my soon-to-be ex-wife. She is having a mental breakdown. I told you she was unstable. She must have slipped past security." He looked back at me, his eyes wide with a mix of embarrassment and fury. "Get out!" Terrence hissed. "Get out right now before I have you dragged out. You are embarrassing yourself. You are embarrassing me. Do you have any idea what kind of meeting this is? This is a board meeting, Tiana. This is for serious people. Go back to the house." I slowly opened the leather portfolio in front of me. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the agenda for the meeting. I leaned toward the microphone in the center of the table. I pressed the button. The small red light turned on. "Mr. Carter," I said, my voice amplified, filling the room with a cool, crisp authority that he had never heard before. "Please sit down. We have a lot to cover and you are already 5 minutes late." Terrence froze. He looked at the microphone. He looked at the board members who were watching him with disgust. He looked at me. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Sit down. You are telling me to sit down. Who do you think you are talking to? I am the future CEO of this company." He looked around the room, desperate for an ally. "Why isn't anyone saying anything? Why are you letting her sit there? She is a housewife. She cleans my floors. Security. Where is security?" Jameson Davis stood up then. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Terrence with the clinical detachment of a surgeon about to cut out a tumor. "Security is outside," Mr. Carter, Jameson said calmly. "But they are not here for Mrs. Carter. They are here to escort you out once this meeting is concluded." Terrence stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "Who are you?" "I am the corporate counsel for Gemini Holdings," Jameson said, "the majority shareholder of Apex Solutions, and I am here representing the interests of the chairwoman." Chairwoman Terrence repeated the word like it was a foreign language. "What chairwoman?" "We don't have a chairwoman." Jameson pointed a hand toward me. "Mr. Carter, I believe you know the chairwoman. You have been living in her house for 3 years." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a world shattering. Terrence looked at me. He looked at the Chanel suit. He looked at the eyes that held no fear. "No," Terrence whispered, shaking his head. "That is impossible. She is broke. She clips coupons. I give her an allowance. I leaned into the microphone again. You gave me an allowance from my own dividends, Terrence, I said. And as of yesterday, I decided to cut off your funding. I picked up the blue folder, the duplicate of the one he had taken. Please take a seat, Terrence. We need to discuss the unauthorized use of company funds for the rental of apartment 4B at the Element Building. And we need to discuss why you thought it was appropriate to slap the chairman of the board at the company gala. Terrence's knees gave out. He slumped into the chair at the foot of the table, staring at me as if I had just turned into a dragon. The trap was sprung. The door was locked. And the housewife he had tormented was holding the gavel. The room was vibrating with a tension so sharp it felt like it could slice skin. Terrence was gripping the back of the leather chair, his knuckles white, his face a mask of disbelief and rapidly crumbling arrogance. He looked from me to Mr. Henderson and back again, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, gasping for air, in an atmosphere he was never meant to survive in. He tried to laugh again, but this time it came out as a dry, strangled wheeze. He pointed a shaking finger at me, refusing to accept the reality that was staring him in the face. He looked at the board members seeking a familiar face, an ally, someone who would tell him this was all a prank. This is a joke, right? Terrence stammered, his voice pitching up an octave. This is some kind of sick, twisted joke. Tiana, get out of that chair. You are embarrassing yourself. Mr. Henderson, tell her she can't sit there. She is just a housewife. She doesn't know the first thing about corporate governance. Mr. Henderson stood up slowly. He didn't look tired anymore. He looked formidable. He placed both hands flat on the mahogany table and leaned forward, projecting his voice with the weight of 30 years of leadership. Terrence, Mr. Henderson said, his voice dropping to a register that commanded absolute silence. You will not raise your voice in this boardroom again, and you certainly will not speak to the chairwoman of the board with that tone. The word hung in the air. Chairwoman. Terrence froze. He looked at Mr. Henderson as if the CEO had just spoken in tongues. Chairwoman, Terrence whispered. No, that is impossible. She is Tiana. She clips coupons. She drives a Honda. She asks me for grocery money. I decided it was time. I stood up. I didn't stand up like the wife who cleaned his shoes. I stood up like the woman who owned the building. As I rose, the tailored navy blue Chanel suit moved with me, a second skin of armor that cost more than his car. The fabric caught the light from the floor to ceiling windows. I buttoned the jacket with a single deliberate click. I smoothed the lapels. I looked down at him from the head of the table, and for the first time he really saw me. He didn't see the woman he had bullied. He saw the predator he had been sleeping next to. I reached for the thick blue folder sitting in front of me. It was the master copy of the audit. I weighed it in my hand for a second, feeling the density of his crimes. Then, with a flick of my wrist, I tossed it down the length of the table. It slid across the polished mahogany with a heavy hiss spinning perfectly until it stopped inches from his hands. It was the exact same motion he had used when he threw the divorce papers at me in the kitchen. Open it, Terrence, I commanded. My voice wasn't loud, but it echoed off the glass walls. He stared at the folder. He didn't want to touch it. Open it, I said sharply. His hand shook as he flipped the cover. That document is a forensic analysis of your spending over the last 18 months, I said, walking slowly down the side of the table toward him. Every eye in the room followed me. Turn to page 12, I instructed. He fumbled with the pages. That is a record of a shell company called CM Consulting. I said, my voice cold and hard. You authorized payments totaling $450,000 to this vendor. But CM Consulting doesn't provide marketing services, does it, Terrence? I stopped right next to him. I could smell his fear. It smelled like sweat and expensive cologne turning sour. CM Consulting pays the rent for a luxury apartment in Buckhead, I continued. Unit 4B, occupied by a Miss Chloe Miller. Your assistant. The board members gasped. A few murmured to each other. Embezzlement was bad enough. Using company funds to keep a mistress was a scandal that could tank the stock price. Terrence looked up at me, his eyes pleading. Tiana, wait. I can explain. It was an advance, a salary advance. I was going to pay it back. I ignored him. Turn to page 20, I said. He didn't move. So I reached down and flipped the pages for him, my hand brushing his shoulder, making him flinch. "Here we have a series of wire transfers to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands," I said, pointing to the red highlighted figures. $80,000, sent to a holding company known for processing online gambling debts. I leaned in close to his ear. "That money paid for Kevin's gambling addiction, Terrence. You stole from this company, you stole from the shareholders, and most personally, you stole from me to pay for your brother's mistakes and your mistress's lifestyle." I stood up straight and looked at the board. "Gentlemen," I said, "the man standing before you has not only falsified quarterly projections to boost his own ego as we saw at the gala. He has systematically looted the corporate treasury. He is not a CEO, he is a liability. And he is a thief." Terrence slammed the folder shut. "No," he shouted, desperation taking over. "This is a setup. She is lying. She is jealous because I filed for divorce. She doctored these papers. Mr. Henderson, you know me. I am the top earner here. I am the future of this company." He looked around the room, his eyes wild. Jameson Davis spoke up from his seat. "The audit was conducted by an independent forensic firm, Mr. Carter. And you signed a receipt of service for these exact documents yesterday afternoon in your own home. You acknowledge the evidence. It is over." Terrence looked at Jameson, remembering the receipt he had signed so arrogantly, thinking it was a victory. The color drained from his face completely. He opened his mouth to beg to spin another lie, to do anything to save himself. But before he could speak, a commotion erupted in the hallway outside the double doors. We heard shouting, high-pitched, frantic screaming, the muffled baritone of the security guards trying to intervene, then the sound of heels clicking rapidly on the marble floor. The boardroom doors flew open again, and Jessica burst in. She was wearing a white dress that was too tight and too short for a corporate environment. Her hair was messy, as if she'd been running. She looked frantic. She pushed past a security guard who was trying to grab her arm. "Get off me," she shrieked. "I need to see my brother-in-law." She stumbled into the room, breathing hard. She didn't look at the board members. She didn't look at the stunned silence. She locked eyes with Terrence. "Terrence!" she yelled, oblivious to the fact that she had just interrupted a funeral. "You have to fix this." My card was declined again. "The rental car company is trying to take the car back. You said the money would be there this morning." She marched toward him, waving her phone. "Kevin is calling me, saying the bookie is at the door." "Terrence, you promised. You said once you were CEO today you would wire the money. Where is it? We are going to lose everything." The silence in the room was absolute. Jessica stopped. She looked around. She saw the 12 solemn faces of the board. She saw Mr. Henderson looking at her with pity. She saw Terrence, pale and sweating, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. And then she saw me. She saw the Chanel suit. She saw the position I was standing in at the head of the table, commanding the room. She saw the look on my face, a look of total unbothered power. "Tiana," Jessica whispered. "What? What are you doing here? Why are you dressed like that?" I smiled. It was the smile of the executioner dropping the blade. "I am working, Jessica," I said coolly. "Something you and your husband should try doing." Terrence closed his eyes. Jessica's outburst had just confirmed everything I had said. She had confirmed the debts. She had confirmed the reliance on his money. She had confirmed this promise of funds he didn't have. Terrence looked at his sister-in-law with pure hatred. "Shut up, Jessica," he hissed. "Just shut up." But it was too late. The damage was done. The facade wasn't just cracked, it was pulverized. I looked at Terrence. I looked at the man who had slapped me. I looked at the man who had tried to gaslight me into believing I was insane. "Terrence Carter," I said, my voice ringing out like a bell. "You are fired." He flinched as if I had hit him. "Your employment is terminated effective immediately for cause," I continued. "Gross misconduct, embezzlement, corporate theft, and assault." I signaled to Jameson. "Mr. Davis has already forwarded this file to the district attorney's office. The police are waiting in the lobby. We are pressing full criminal charges. You aren't just losing your job, Terrence. You are going to prison." Terrence fell back into the chair, clutching the table for support. "Prison," he whispered. "Tiana, please. We are married. You can't send your husband to prison." I looked at him with zero emotion. "I am not sending my husband to prison," I said. I am sending a criminal to justice. I checked my watch. The diamond bezel caught the light. You have 5 minutes to clear your personal effects from your office, I said. Anything left after that will be incinerated. And Terrence. He looked up, tears streaming down his face. Leave the company credit card. It has been canceled anyway. I nodded to the security guards who were waiting by the door. Remove him, I said. 2 large guards in dark suits stepped forward. They didn't ask him to stand. They grabbed him by the arms. Terrence tried to shake them off, his dignity gone. Get your hands off me, he shouted. I am the CEO. I am the CEO. They hauled him up. They dragged him toward the door. Jessica screamed, trying to grab him, but another guard blocked her path. Terrence looked back at me one last time as they dragged him across the threshold. His eyes were wide with terror. Tiana, please. I am sorry, I love you. Don't do this. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I watched him get dragged out of the room he thought he would rule. The doors swung open wide. Outside in the main atrium, the entire staff of Apex Solutions had gathered. They had heard the shouting. They saw their arrogant, bullying CMO being frog-marched out of the building by security, his feet dragging on the floor, weeping like a child. They saw Jessica running after him, screaming about money and rental cars. And they saw me. I walked to the door and stood in the frame. I watched the elevator doors open. I watched the guards throw him inside. I watched the doors close, cutting off his screams. I turned back to the boardroom. The directors were all looking at me. There was no doubt in their eyes anymore. There was only respect and a little bit of fear. I walked back to the head of the table. I sat down in the chairman's seat. I looked at Mr. Henderson. Shall we proceed with the rest of the agenda? I asked calmly. I believe we have a vacancy to fill. Mr. Henderson smiled, a real genuine smile. Yes, Madam Chairwoman, he said. I believe we do. I opened my portfolio. The meeting had officially begun. And for the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged. The fall of Terrence Carter was not a slow decline. It was a vertical drop at terminal velocity. The moment the elevator doors closed on his screaming face in the lobby of Apex Solutions, his life as he knew it ceased to exist. He did not go home to lick his wounds. He went straight to the central booking station of the Fulton County Jail. The forensic evidence I had provided to the district attorney was so comprehensive, so airtight, that the judge denied him bail on the grounds that he was a flight risk. They found his passport in his briefcase, along with a browser history searching for non-extradition countries. He spent the first 3 nights in a holding cell wearing the same suit I had ironed for him, now wrinkled and smelling of sweat and despair. When he was finally allowed a phone call, he did not call his mother. He did not call his brother. He called Chloe. I know this because my private investigator Vance had access to the call logs through the discovery process. Terrence used his one call to dial the woman he had stolen nearly $500,000 to impress. He needed bail money. He needed a character witness. He needed the comfort of the woman he had thrown his marriage away for. The call lasted exactly 45 seconds. Chloe picked up. Terrence frantically explained his situation, begging her to sell the jewelry he had bought her, to liquidate the lease on the apartment, to do anything to get him out. Chloe laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. She told him that the police had already visited the apartment. She told him that she had claimed ignorance, telling the detectives that she thought Terrence was a wealthy benefactor and she had no idea the money was stolen. She had turned state's witness against him to save her own skin. I don't date unemployed felons, Terrence, she said, and I certainly don't date men who get caught. Don't call this number again. She hung up, and just like that, the fantasy life he had built on a foundation of theft evaporated. He was left holding the receiver, listening to the dial tone, realizing that the love he thought he had found was just another transaction he could no longer afford. The financial ruin came next. Since I had frozen the assets and initiated the divorce proceedings based on fault, Terrence was left with nothing. The BMW X5 was repossessed from the company parking lot an hour after his arrest. The lease on the rental house was terminated. His personal bank accounts were seized to pay back the restitution to Apex Solutions. He had to sell his watch, his designer clothes, and even his golf clubs just to pay the retainer for a mediocre defense attorney who told him to plead guilty and hope for mercy. But the rot in the Carter family did not stop with Terrence. It spread to the limbs he had been artificially supporting. Kevin and Jessica were the first to turn on each other. Without Terrence's stolen money flowing into Kevin's gambling accounts, the bookies came calling. They were not polite. They took Kevin's car. They threatened much worse. Jessica, the woman who had sneered at my thriftiness and poured wine on her own shoes to humiliate me, showed her true colors the moment the credit card was declined for the final time. She did not stand by her man. She did not get a job to help support him. 2 weeks after Terrence's arrest, Jessica packed her bags. She told Kevin that she could not live in this stress environment. She told him that she deserved better. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she had already lined up a new target, a divorced real estate agent in Buckhead who drove a Porsche. She left Kevin alone in their apartment with an eviction notice taped to the door and an empty refrigerator. She blocked his number. She blocked Terrence's number. She blocked Lorraine's number. She vanished like a parasite looking for a new host, proving exactly what I had known all along. She never loved Kevin. She loved the proximity to Terrence's perceived wealth. And then there was Lorraine, my mother-in-law, the woman who had enabled her son's entitlement for decades, the woman who had told me to know my place. She showed up at the Apex Solutions headquarters 3 weeks after the arrest. She couldn't get past security, of course. I had blacklisted her name from the building. So she waited in the lobby, sitting on a hard bench near the revolving doors, clutching her handbag like a shield. I saw her when I walked out for lunch. I was flanked by Mr. Henderson and Jameson. I was wearing a white power suit, looking every bit the chairwoman I was. Lorraine jumped up when she saw me. She looked older. Her faux fur coat looked tatty. Her face was drawn and pale. "Tiana," she cried out, rushing toward the security barrier. "Tiana, please." Security stepped in to block her, but I held up a hand. I signaled them to let her speak. I wanted to hear this. I wanted to hear what the matriarch of the Carter dynasty had to say now that her kingdom had burned to the ground. She gripped the velvet rope, tears streaming down her face. "Tiana, you have to stop this," she begged. "He is your husband. He is my son. They are talking about 10 years in prison, Tiana. 10 years! You can't let them do that to him." I looked at her calmly. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing. "I am not doing anything to him, Lorraine," I said. "The law is doing it. He stole $450,000. He committed fraud. He assaulted me. Actions have consequences. But we are family," Lorraine wailed, playing the card she always played when she needed money. "The Bible says to forgive. You are a Christian woman, Tiana. You have to have mercy. He made a mistake. He was stressed. He will pay it back. Just drop the charges, please, for me." I stepped closer to the rope. I looked her dead in the eye. "He didn't make a mistake, Lorraine. He made a choice. He chose to steal. He chose to cheat. He chose to hit me. And you chose to watch." I remembered the morning in my living room. I remembered her rolling her eyes at my bruise. I remembered her telling me I provoked him. "You stood in my house," I said, my voice low and icy. "You stood there while my face was throbbing from his slap, and you told me I deserved it. You told me to learn my place." Lorraine flinched, her eyes darting away. "I was trying to keep the peace," she stammered. "I was trying to help you keep your marriage." "No," I corrected her. "You were trying to keep your meal ticket. You didn't care about me. You didn't care about my safety. You only cared that the money kept flowing so you could pretend to be rich. You didn't want a daughter-in-law, Lorraine. You wanted a donor. And now that the donor has closed the bank, you suddenly want to talk about family." I shook my head slowly. "My family protects me, Lorraine. My family respects me. You are not my family. You are just people I used to know." "But what will I do?" she whispered, the reality setting in. "Terrence paid my mortgage. Kevin is broke. I will lose my house, Tiana. I will be on the street." I looked at her one last time. I thought about the millions I had in the bank. I thought about how easy it would be to write a check and save her. But I also thought about the young women I was planning to help with my new foundation. Women who were survivors. Women who were trying to build something real. Lorraine wasn't a builder. She was a demolition crew. "I suggest you get a job, Lorraine," I said. "I hear the housekeeping staff here is hiring. It is honest work, and it might teach you the value of $1. I turned my back on her. "Tiana," she screamed. "Tiana, you can't leave me like this." I kept walking. I walked through the revolving doors and out into the bright, warm sunshine of Atlanta. I didn't look back. Behind me, the security guards were gently but firmly escorting her out of the building. Her screams faded into the noise of the city. Terrence was in a cell. Kevin was running from loan sharks. Jessica was hunting for a new victim. And Lorraine was facing the reality she had avoided for a lifetime. The villains had fallen. Not because I pushed them, but because I finally stepped out of the way and let gravity take its course. 6 months have passed since the doors of the elevator closed on Terrence's screaming face, and the silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. In the wake of his removal, the atmosphere at Apex Solutions did not crumble. It flourished. As the new chairwoman of the board, I did not just occupy the corner office, I redefined it. The first thing I did was remove the dark, heavy mahogany furniture that Terrence and his predecessors had favored. I replaced it with glass and light and open spaces. I wanted the sunlight to touch every corner of the room, just as I wanted transparency to touch every corner of the business. I launched the Silent Partners Initiative, a program funded entirely by the dividends I had reclaimed from Terrence's embezzlement. It was designed specifically to support women in the company who had been overlooked, overtalked, or undervalued. We created a legal defense fund for victims of workplace harassment, and I made it personally clear that the boys' club culture that Terrence had cultivated was dead. Any executive who interrupted a female colleague in a meeting was given a warning. Any executive who did it twice was given a box to pack their things. The company stock did not tank as the old guard feared. It soared. It turned out that when you treat your employees with dignity, they work harder. When you remove the toxic ego from the leadership, the company actually leads. I was sitting in my office reviewing the quarterly projections, which were finally accurate, when my assistant buzzed in. She told me that Mr. Julian Sterling was here for our 2:00 clock. I smiled. Julian was not a lawyer like his namesake Lionel. He was a venture capitalist from Chicago, a man who had built his fortune in green energy. He had flown in specifically to discuss a partnership with Apex. When Julian walked in, he did not strut. He did not fill the room with nervous, arrogant energy. He walked in with a quiet confidence, wearing a suit that was tailored but not flashy. He was tall, with skin the color of deep mahogany, and eyes that held a kindness I wasn't used to seeing in men of his tax bracket. "Miss Carter," he said, extending his hand, "it is an honor to finally meet the woman who turned this ship around. I have been following your restructuring from Chicago, and I have to say, I am impressed." He didn't comment on my appearance. He didn't look at my legs. He commented on my work. He sat down, and for the next hour we didn't talk about him. We talked about ideas. He listened when I spoke. He took notes. He asked for my perspective on market trends, and he actually waited for the answer. It was a foreign sensation. For years I had been trained to shrink to make myself smaller so Terrence could feel big. With Julian, I felt like I could expand to my full size, and he wasn't intimidated, he was inspired. As the meeting wrapped up, he closed his notebook and looked at me. There was a hesitation, a slight break in his professional demeanor. "Tiana," he said, using my first name for the first time, "I know your divorce was only finalized last month, and I know you are focused on rebuilding, but I would love to continue this conversation over dinner, not as business partners, just as two people who appreciate the view from the top." I looked at him. I saw the respect in his eyes. I saw a man who didn't need me to be weak. I saw a man who was looking for an equal, not a servant. "I am not ready for anything serious, Julian," I said honestly. "I am still enjoying the silence of my own home." Julian smiled, and it was a warm, patient smile. "I understand completely," he said, standing up. "I am a patient investor, Tiana. I know that the best things take time to mature. The offer stands whenever you are ready." He left the office, leaving behind a card and a sense of possibility. I wasn't going to rush. I wasn't going to jump into another relationship. But knowing that there were men like Julian out there, men who saw a CEO where Terrence saw a maid, made me realize that my life wasn't over. It was just beginning. I had cleaned house literally and metaphorically, and now I had the space to fill it with whatever I wanted. I left the office that evening feeling lighter than air. The sun was setting, painting the Atlanta sky in shades of purple and gold. I walked to the private garage where my car was waiting. It was the Mercedes G-Wagon, the matte black beast that I had ordered the day I decided to destroy Terrence. I slid into the red leather seat and started the engine. The roar of the motor was a reminder of my power. I drove out of the parking structure and merged onto the busy city streets. The traffic was heavy, but I didn't mind. I had the windows down, letting the evening breeze cool my face. As I stopped at a red light near the downtown transit center, I looked to my right. There was a bus stop crowded with tired commuters waiting for the number 42 line. And there he was, Terrence. He was wearing a uniform. It was a gray jumpsuit with the logo of a commercial cleaning company stitched onto the pocket. He looked thinner. His hair was slightly overgrown. The arrogance that had once defined his posture was gone, replaced by a slump of defeat. He was holding a plastic bag, likely his dinner. He was staring at the ground, avoiding eye contact with the world that had rejected him. He was out on bail awaiting trial, but no company would hire him. His reputation was radioactive. The man who had once demanded that I iron his shirts so he could look like a king was now cleaning floors in buildings he used to think he owned. I watched him for a moment. I could have honked. I could have shouted something cruel. I could have rolled down the window and laughed. But I didn't. I felt no need to kick a man who was already down. His punishment wasn't my insults. His punishment was his reality. Then he looked up. He saw the G-Wagon. He saw the matte black paint. And then he saw me. Our eyes locked across the lane of traffic. I saw the recognition hit him. I saw the shame flood his face. I saw him look at the steering wheel of my six-figure car and then look down at the bus pass in his hand. He didn't glare. He didn't shout. He just lowered his head and turned away, unable to bear the weight of the image. I didn't smile. I just looked forward as the light turned green. I pressed the accelerator, and the car surged forward, leaving him behind in a cloud of exhaust and regret. I drove toward the highway, toward my new penthouse, toward a future that belonged entirely to me. He had slapped me because of a joke. He had slapped me because he wanted to silence me, because he wanted to remind me of my place. He thought his hand was the ultimate weapon. He thought violence was power. But he was wrong. I slapped him back with a forensic audit. I slapped him back with a signed receipt. I slapped him back with the truth. I learned something powerful in that boardroom. Women like us, we don't need to scream to be heard. We don't need to throw punches to win a fight. We don't need to lower ourselves to the level of our abusers. We just need to own the board. We need to know the rules better than they do. We need to move in silence while they make noise. And when the time is right, we don't need to attack. We just need to reveal the hand we have been holding all along. I am Tiana Carter. I was a scapegoat. I was a punching bag. I was a maid. Now I am the chairwoman. And as I merge onto the freeway heading home to a house where nobody tells me what to do, I know one thing for sure. The best revenge isn't seeing them suffer. The best revenge is living so well that you forget they even exist. If you have ever been underestimated, if you have ever been told to know your place, if you have ever had to fight a war in silence, hit that like and subscribe button. Share this story with a woman who needs to be reminded of her power. Because you never know who is sitting across the table from you. She might just own the building.